She stood on land worth $500 million, pointing her finger at a man she thought was nobody. "Move your equipment, now, or I'll have this whole property seized by Friday." The man didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, just looked at her the way the land itself might look at someone who didn't understand what roots mean: steady, ancient, and completely unmoved. What Clara Dawson didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the quiet, sun-weathered man leaning against that rusted fence post owned every acre she was standing on, owned the water running 60 feet beneath her shoes, and held the single legal document that could bring an entire billion-dollar empire to its knees. She'd come to Red Hollow to save herself. She had no idea she was about to save everyone else. If this story moves you, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, and stay with me until the very end. You won't regret it. The town of Red Hollow, Texas, sat about 90 miles southeast of Abilene in a stretch of country that most people drove through without stopping. Flat horizon, dry grass gone amber in October, cattle standing still as fence posts along both sides of the highway. There was a diner, a feed store, a post office the size of a garage, and a water tower that still had the high school football score from 2019 painted on it in faded blue letters. Nobody had bothered to wash it off. In Red Hollow, that kind of thing counted as history. The town had roughly 800 people, though that number swelled some on weekends when ranching families came in from the surrounding land to buy groceries or grab breakfast at Patsy's Diner on Main. Most of those families had been working the same acreage for 2 or 3 generations. They knew each other's grandparents. They knew which wells ran dry in August and which roads flooded in spring. They knew things about the land that couldn't be written down, the kind of knowledge that lived in the hands and the lower back and the memory of every drought survived. Clara Dawson did not know any of this when she drove into Red Hollow at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning in October, a travel mug of cold gas station coffee wedged between her thigh and the center console, her phone mounted on the dashboard showing GPS directions to a pasture address that her supervisor had texted her the night before. She drove a company car, a silver Chevy Tahoe, barely a year old, leased by Meridian Land Development out of Dallas. It had that particular smell of new plastic and carpet cleaner that Clara had come to associate with jobs that required you to pretend you were more important than you were. She'd been driving company cars for 6 years. She still didn't own one of her own. Her directions took her off the state highway and onto a county road paved in sections, crumbling at the edges where the callous shoulder met the blacktop. She passed a hand-painted sign for fresh eggs, a cattle gate tied shut with baling wire, a mailbox shaped like a longhorn. Then the road curved around a stand of cedar trees and opened up onto a wide brown pasture where a man was working a tractor along the far fence line, pulling something behind it that threw up a small dust trail. Clara stopped the car, checked her phone, checked the property survey printout on the passenger seat, and confirmed she was in the right place. She got out. The morning air hit her immediately, cold and clean in a way that Dallas air never was, carrying the smell of dried grass and something faintly mineral, like wet rock. She stood beside the car for a moment, squinting across the pasture at the tractor. It was a Tuesday. She had a meeting with county commissioners at 10, a call with her regional director at noon, and a deadline that had been described to her as non-negotiable so many times in the past 2 weeks that the phrase had started appearing in her dreams. She didn't have time to wait for a ranch hand to finish his rounds. She walked toward the fence. Clara had grown up in Corpus Christi, in a house with a leaking roof and a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry. Her childhood wasn't the kind that gets described as hard in a way that sounds romantic. It was just grinding, the slow, dull pressure of never having enough, of watching the electric bill decide whether you ate dinner or kept the lights on, not both. She'd gotten herself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduated with a business degree and a tolerance for discomfort that most of her classmates didn't have. She'd taken the job at Meridian because it paid well and offered a path. Regional director in 5 years if she closed enough deals. She'd been chasing that path for 6 years. It kept moving. Her debt situation was, to use the technical term, a disaster. Student loans, a medical bill from an emergency appendix surgery 2 years ago that her insurance had covered only in part, a personal loan she'd taken out to help her mother after the Corpus Christi house finally needed a new roof. She was not behind on payments. She was meticulous about that. almost obsessively so. But she was also 30 years old, sleeping in a one-bedroom apartment in a part of Dallas that was only acceptable because it was close to the highway, and she had, at last count, $412 in her savings account. The Red Hollow deal was supposed to fix that. A successful acquisition and land survey project of this scale would earn her a bonus that could actually change the math of her life. Her director, a man named Preston Wyatt, who wore cufflinks and referred to rural landowners as obstacles, had made it clear that this was her project to win or lose. So Clara walked across a stranger's pasture at 7 in the morning in her good boots, which were not ranch boots, which were the kind of ankle boots you wore to Dallas business meetings, and which were absolutely not designed for uneven ground, because she needed this to go right. She reached the fence line as the tractor completed its loop and came back toward her. The man driving it cut the engine when he noticed her standing there, and for a moment there was just the sound of the engine ticking down and the wind moving through the dried grass. He climbed down from the cab. He was maybe 6 feet tall, wearing a canvas jacket the color of old brick, jeans that had been washed so many times they'd gone pale at the knees, and boots that were the real thing, cracked leather, crusted at the toe with real dirt, the kind you earned by wearing them every day for years. He had dark hair going a little gray at the temples, a jaw that needed shaving, and the kind of stillness that some people have naturally and others spend years trying to perform. He looked to be in his early 30s, maybe. He walked toward the fence slowly, not in the way of someone reluctant, but in the way of someone who didn't see a reason to hurry. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." Clara had her clipboard out, which felt suddenly ridiculous. "I'm Clara Dawson with Meridian Land Development out of Dallas. I'm the project coordinator for the Red Hollow acquisition. Are you the property manager here?" He considered the question for a moment. "I work the land." "Okay." She took that as a yes. "I need this equipment moved back from the eastern fence line by end of week. We have survey crews coming in Thursday morning, and this whole section needs to be accessible." She indicated the tractor behind him with a gesture. "Can you make sure whoever is in charge knows that?" He looked at the tractor, then back at her. "What survey crews?" "Meridian is acquiring parcels in this area for a development project. The county has been notified. We're beginning preliminary surveys this week, and we need clear access along the eastern and southern lines." She heard herself and recognized the tone. It was the tone Preston Wyatt used on phone calls, the one that implied the conversation was already over. She hated the tone. She used it anyway because it usually worked. "This is future company property, and we need future company property," he said. Not a question, not hostile, just repeating it back like he was checking whether she'd really said it. "Yes." She met his eyes. They were an ordinary enough color, sir, dark, maybe brown, but there was something about how steadily he held her gaze that made her want to look away first. She didn't. "Can you let whoever's in charge know?" "I'll let them know," he said. He said it without any particular expression, and then he just looked at her for a moment, not rudely, not with anything she could name, before turning back toward the tractor. Clara stood there for a second with her clipboard. "Thank you," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. He didn't answer. He climbed back up into the tractor cab, settled into the seat, and started the engine. The morning swallowed her words, and the machine noise took over, and Clara walked back to the Tahoe, feeling, for a reason she couldn't quite identify, like she'd done something vaguely wrong. She shook the feeling off. She had a meeting at 10. The county commissioner's office smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Clara sat across from a man named Gerald Briggs, who wore a bolo tie and read her acquisition documents with the slow deliberation of someone who had never once felt rushed in his professional life. The conference room had a window that looked out onto Main Street. Clara watched a truck go by pulling a horse trailer. Then another truck. A woman walked a dog. A man came out of the feed store carrying a bag of something on his shoulder. "These survey coordinates," Gerald said without looking up, "overlap with the Callaway Ranch." "That's correct. We have parcels under negotiation." "Under negotiation." Gerald looked up now. He had the face of a man who'd spent 40 years outdoors and come inside too late. "Miss Dawson, the Callaway Ranch has been in that family for 112 years. "I understand that." She kept her voice steady. "But the property records show—" "I know what the property records show." He set the papers down flat on the table. Not hard, not dramatically, just flat. Finished. I'm telling you what the situation is on the ground. You're new to this area, so I'm just letting you know. Meridian has been in contact with the county zoning board. Gerald folded his hands. That's different from being in contact with the people who own the land. Clara wrote nothing down. She sat very still. Has anyone from Meridian spoken directly with the Calloway family? Gerald smiled in a way that wasn't warm. Somebody sent a letter. I see. She looked at her papers. Do you know the family? Everybody in Red Hollow knows Ethan Calloway. Gerald picked up his coffee mug, which had the Texas state flag on it and appeared to have last been washed sometime during a previous administration. His great-granddaddy started that ranch. Ethan runs it now. Has since he was about 24 after his father passed. A pause. He's had some hard years. Raises his little girl out there alone. Good man. Clara filed this away. Not emotionally. She didn't have room for emotional right now, but practically. Good standing in the community. Established roots, potentially difficult to negotiate with. She'd dealt with resistant landowners before. The key was usually to identify what they actually wanted underneath the resistance. I'd like to set up a meeting with Mr. Calloway, she said. I imagine you would. Gerald stood, which meant the meeting was over. You might try the feed store on Thursdays. He comes in most weeks. Clara drove back to the motel. A place called the Lone Star Inn, 12 rooms, a vending machine that took cash only, and sat on the edge of the bed with her laptop and a stack of folders. She'd been allocated 2 weeks to complete the preliminary survey and acquisition phase. 2 weeks, and then she needed to return to Dallas with signed documents or a clear plan for compulsion. She opened the acquisition folder and started reading from the beginning. She read for 4 hours. She took notes. She cross-referenced. She made herself a second cup of motel coffee, which tasted approximately like hot brown water, and kept reading. By midnight, she had a headache starting at the base of her skull. But she also had a growing sense, not yet alarm, not yet, of something that didn't add up. The acquisition documents described a straightforward land purchase, a development project, retail and residential expansion into underutilized rural land, standard Meridian language. But there was a secondary annexure. She almost missed it. It was labeled as a water rights amendment, buried between 2 zoning variance documents, and it was written in the particular way of legal language that wants to explain something without fully explaining it. Clara read it 3 times. Then she set it aside and told herself she'd look at it again in the morning when she wasn't tired. She looked at it again in the morning. It said the same thing. She went to the feed store on Thursday. It was a squat, metal-sided building at the edge of Main Street with a loading dock out front and sacks of cattle feed stacked under a corrugated awning. It smelled like grain and mineral supplements and the particular dusty warmth of animals that aren't present but recently were. A mounted longhorn skull hung above the door. Clara walked under it feeling moderately absurd in her business casual jacket. There were 4 people inside when she entered. An old man examining a catalog, a woman in her 50s filling out a form, a teenager loading something onto a hand truck in the back, and the man from the fence. She recognized him immediately, which surprised her because she'd only seen him once and briefly. But there was something about the way he stood that was specific. The particular weight of his attention on whatever he was doing, which right now was talking to the man behind the counter about a part for some piece of equipment Clara couldn't have named. She walked to the counter and waited. He glanced at her. A small, brief flicker of recognition. Then back to the counter guy. Should be the same fitting as the '09 model. If not, I'll bring it back. Fair enough. I'll order 2. A nod. He picked up the paper receipt, folded it in half, and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he turned to look at her fully. Miss Dawson. He remembered her name. She wasn't sure why that surprised her. Mr. She realized she didn't have his last name. The ranch hand from the fence had given her nothing. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name last time. Calloway, he said. Ethan. The name hit her like something physical. She processed it fast, Gerald's voice saying everybody in Red Hollow knows Ethan Calloway, and rearranged her understanding of who she was looking at. Not the ranch hand, not a property manager. The owner. She stopped, recalibrated, extended her hand. Clara Dawson, Meridian Land Development. I was hoping I I know who you are. He shook her hand. His grip was unremarkable, not crushing, not limp, just a handshake. You're the one who wants me to move my tractor. There it was. Not said with particular meanness, but Clara felt it anyway. The precision of it, the accuracy, the fact that her first impression with this man had been that of someone issuing orders on property she didn't own. I owe you an apology for that, she said. She surprised herself. She hadn't planned to say it. He looked at her for a moment. Apology for what? I spoke to you like you were... She stopped. I didn't have accurate information about who you were. Would it have changed how you talked to me? The question landed quietly, like something dropped from a height. She opened her mouth, closed it. The honest answer was she didn't know. The professional answer was yes, of course. The true answer was somewhere between those, and she wasn't quite willing to say it out loud. He watched her not answer, and something shifted in his expression, not unkindly. You wanted a meeting, he said. Yes. I've got 20 minutes. They sat on a bench outside the feed store, which Clara would not have predicted as a meeting venue for a negotiation of this scale, but she had a feeling that pointing this out would not help her case. She laid out the Meridian proposal. She did it professionally, clearly, without the Wyatt cufflinks energy, just the facts as she understood them. Development project. Land acquisition. Fair market value plus 20%. Infrastructure improvements that would benefit the broader area. Ethan listened. He sat with his forearms resting on his knees and his hands loosely linked, and he listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, What about the spring? She paused. The spring. He looked at her. On the eastern edge, below the pasture. You've seen it in the survey maps. She had. It appeared in the survey documents as a natural spring source, a feature that the acquisition documents noted as part of the parcel's water rights. She'd thought about the secondary annexure all week, and she still wasn't sure she fully understood what it meant. What about it? She said. That spring feeds 17 properties in this area. He said it simply, not angrily. Has for as long as anybody's been here. There's no municipal water out this way. Ranching families, a few older homes, all of them running off that aquifer. Clara wrote nothing down. She was very aware of not writing this down. The development project's going to need water, he said. Big project like what you're describing, retail, residential. That's a significant draw. Where's it coming from? The engineering team already told someone where it's coming from. He looked at her steadily. I'm asking if you know. Clara sat on that bench in the October morning with the sound of a truck going by on Main and a dog barking somewhere down the street, and she felt the secondary annexure sitting in her laptop bag like something with weight. I'm going to look into it, she said. It wasn't the answer a Meridian project coordinator was supposed to give, but it was the only truthful one she had. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and dusted his hands on his jeans in a gesture that was habitual, automatic, the gesture of someone who works with them constantly. You can look into it, he said. I'm not signing anything in the meantime. That's your right. It is. He picked up the paper bag with his equipment part. You have a card? She gave him one. He looked at it for a moment. The Meridian logo, her name, her title, her Dallas number, and put it in his jacket pocket with the receipt. Thank you for coming in person, he said. Most of your company just sends letters. He walked to his truck, a dark green F250 that had seen better years, and drove away. Clara sat on the bench for a moment with her folder on her knees. Then she took out her phone and called Preston Wyatt. You're overthinking it, Preston said. He had the voice of a man who had spent his entire career being the smartest person in any room he'd decided to enter. Preston, it says the project's water draw is being rerouted through the existing aquifer system. That's engineering language. The engineering team handles, it says draw from existing sources. Clara was in the parking lot of the Lone Star Inn with the wind coming at her sideways and her jacket not quite warm enough. Preston, if that spring dries up, 17 properties in this area lose their primary water source. A silence that was doing a lot of work. Water rights in Texas are complex, Preston said. That's why we have lawyers. I know water rights are complex. I'm asking you to tell me straight. Is the Meridian project planning to draw from that aquifer? Another silence. Clara. The voice shifted. The friendly but firm register that people use when they want to redirect you without seeming to. This project is a $200 million investment. We are 3 months from breaking ground on phase 1. Your job, your specific job, is to complete the acquisition phase. That's it. Engineering is not your department. It becomes my department when I'm the one sitting across from the landowner. Then tell the landowner what he needs to hear to sign the papers. She stared at the parking lot. A tumble of dead leaves blew across the asphalt. What he needs to hear, she said, or what's true. The silence this time had a different quality. Sharp, edged. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that, Preston said, because you're tired and you're in the middle of nowhere and it sounds like you're getting attached to a deal instead of closing it. Get some sleep, Clara. Let's talk tomorrow. He hung up. Clara stood in the parking lot for a while after that. The stars above Red Hollow were unreasonably bright. There was no competing light out here, nothing to wash them out. She didn't spend much time looking at stars in Dallas. She spent most of her time looking at screens and ceilings and the face of whoever was across from her in a negotiation. She went inside and pulled out the secondary annexure and read it a 5th time. The language was careful, very careful. Carefully vague in the specific way of legal documents that are designed to permit something without naming it. But the math was simple if you pulled in the engineering projections from the other annexure, the one about projected daily water draw, and cross-referenced it with the aquifer survey from the county environmental office that she'd requested 2 days ago and that had arrived in her email that afternoon. She did the math. Then she did it again because she'd made an error the first time. She'd hoped she'd made an error. But she got the same number both times. At the projected draw rate, the aquifer would be critically depleted within 4 to 7 years of full project operation. 17 families. She kept coming back to that number, not a statistic. Ethan had said it like it was people he knew, because they were. She saved the calculations, closed her laptop, lay on the motel bed staring at the water-stained ceiling and did not sleep very much. She didn't plan to meet the daughter. She'd been driving past the ranch on her way to a second county records meeting. She'd started taking the longer route without entirely acknowledging why, when she saw a child sitting on top of a fence rail outside the front gate, very still, holding something in her lap. Clara pulled over because the child was maybe 7 years old and appeared to be alone on a fence rail on a county road, which was the kind of thing you stopped for. She got out. The girl looked up. She had her father's dark eyes and a red coat that was slightly too big for her and her hair in 2 braids that someone had started carefully and finished in a rush. She was holding a book, an actual paper book, the old illustrated kind, open on her lap. "Hi," Clara said. "Hi." The girl looked at her without alarm. Kids in Red Hollow apparently didn't approach strangers with the same wariness as city kids. "Are you lost?" "No. I saw you sitting out here by yourself and wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm waiting for my dad." The girl held up the book. "I'm reading." "What are you reading?" The girl showed her the cover. Charlotte's Web. "That's a good one," Clara said. "It makes me cry every time, but I keep reading it." She said this with the matter-of-fact quality of someone who has made peace with this fact about themselves. "I'm Lily." "Clara, do you work for the company that wants to buy our ranch?" Clara was briefly at a loss. "Yes," she said, because lying to a 7-year-old seemed worse than the alternative. Lily looked at her for a moment. "My dad says we're not selling." "Your dad might be right." That seemed to surprise the girl. "You think he's right?" "I think—" Clara stopped, chose words. "I think it's complicated." Lily thought about this. "My grandpa built this ranch," she said, "and my great-grandpa before that. My dad says the land's got our family in it, like—" She paused, searching. "Like how a book's got words. You can't take the words out and still have the same book." Clara stood on the side of the county road with the wind in her face and a 7-year-old comparing land to literature and felt something move behind her sternum that she would not have been able to describe to Preston Wyatt in 1,000 years. "That's a really smart thing to say," she said. "My dad says it." Lily looked back at the road. "Here he comes." The green F-250 came around the bend and slowed when Ethan saw the Tahoe and Clara standing by the fence. He pulled over, got out, walked toward them with his eyes moving between his daughter and Clara with an expression that was neutral but alert. "She stopped because she thought I was lost," Lily said before he could speak. I wasn't. I was reading. Ethan looked at Clara. She's not lost, he confirmed. I know. A beat. She was telling me about the ranch. Something shifted in his face. Not much. He looked at Lily, who had gone back to her book, then at Clara. You got a minute? He said. They stood beside the gate while Lily read. The conversation started about the acquisition, the way their conversations always did, but it didn't stay there. Ethan talked about his great-grandfather arriving in Red Hollow with almost nothing and spending 20 years building the ranch up from a few hundred acres. About his grandfather who'd expanded it through 2 droughts by refusing to sell when every bank in the county said sell. About his father who taught him how to read land, which direction the grass leaned, where the water pooled in spring, what the cattle behavior told you about underground moisture. He didn't say any of this sentimentally. He said it the way you'd describe a set of instructions. Here's how this thing works. Here's what it means. Here's why it matters. Like explaining a language. Clara listened. She'd interviewed dozens of landowners. Usually they talked about property value, tax implications, what they do with the money. Ethan didn't talk about money once. When did you lose your wife? She asked, and then immediately wasn't sure why she'd asked it. It wasn't a negotiating question. He was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, he said. Cancer. Fast kind. I'm sorry. He nodded once, not brushing it off, acknowledging it. Then, Lily was 4. She doesn't remember her mom as well as I'd like her to. He watched his daughter on the fence rail. I try to tell her stories, keep it alive, but I don't always have the right words. What was she like? Another pause. Longer. He seemed to be deciding something. She loved the spring, he said finally. Used to go down there in the mornings with her coffee and just sit. Said it was the quietest place she'd ever been. He picked at the fence rail without looking at it. That's what I think about when people talk about water rights documents. She used to sit by that spring. Clara said nothing. The wind moved through the dried grass. Lily turned a page. I should let you go, Clara said after a while. Yeah. He didn't move immediately. You doing anything for dinner? She looked at him. Patsy's makes a decent chicken fried steak, he said. It's not a negotiation. Lily likes company. She doesn't get enough of it out here. Clara looked at Lily on the fence rail, reading about a spider who writes words in silk to save a pig from slaughter, crying every time but doing it anyway. Okay, Clara said. Dinner at Patsy's was loud in the specific way of small-town diners, counter stools and formica, and the cook yelling something to the waitress, and a TV mounted in the corner showing local news that nobody was watching. Lily ordered chicken strips and demanded to tell Clara about every book she'd read in the past year, which turned out to be 14, which was more than Clara had read in 2 years. Ethan ate his chicken fried steak and listened more than he spoke, and occasionally redirected Lily when she started repeating herself, which was a skill Clara recognized as the kind that takes practice. Nobody talked about the acquisition. Nobody talked about the spring. At some point, between Lily's summary of Island of the Blue Dolphins and her beginning of The Secret Garden, Clara looked across the table and found Ethan looking at her. Not intensely, just noticing her, the way you notice something when you've been watching it for long enough that it stopped being a background thing. She looked back. He looked away first, at his coffee. She drove back to the Lone Star Inn and sat in the parking lot for a while. The problem with being good at her job was that she knew how to keep the personal and professional separate. She'd been doing it for years. It was a skill she'd refined out of necessity. If you let yourself feel things during a negotiation, you lost the negotiation. Simple as that. But she was sitting in a motel parking lot in a town of 800 people, and she had a spreadsheet on her laptop that showed what the water table would look like in 7 years. And she'd had dinner with a 7-year-old who cried at the same book over and over and kept reading it. And the man across the table had said she used to sit by that spring like it was a prayer. Clara opened her laptop. She pulled up the annexure. She pulled up the aquifer survey. She pulled up the engineering projections. And then she started writing an email to Preston Wyatt that said things she was pretty sure would end her time at Meridian. She wrote it anyway. She wrote it carefully, professionally, citing the specific documents and the specific numbers. She said that the acquisition, as structured, would cause material harm to existing water access for 17 documented properties. She said this constituted a liability that legal had apparently chosen not to flag. She said she needed clarification before proceeding. She didn't send it. She saved it as a draft. Then she went to bed and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside the window started to go gray. Preston called at 7:30 the next morning. She hadn't sent the email, but apparently the questions she'd been asking through official channels, the county records requests, the aquifer data, had flagged something somewhere, because his voice was different when she answered. "I need you to stop requesting county environmental records," he said. Clara was brushing her teeth. She wasn't done, but she put the toothbrush down. "I'm doing due diligence," she said. "That's the job. The job is acquisition. Environmental review is handled by... If environmental review is handled separately, why is an environmental annexure buried in the acquisition documents?" Silence. "Preston." She sat on the edge of the bed. "I need you to tell me what the plan is for the aquifer. I've told you. Engineering handles... The engineering documents say the project will draw from existing groundwater sources at a rate of approximately 11 million gallons annually at full operation. The county aquifer survey shows the spring system has a sustainable yield of 6 million gallons. The math on that is not complicated." Silence again, but different. This one had something in it. "Where did you get a county aquifer survey?" Preston said. "I requested it through the county environmental office, which is public record." "Clara." The voice went lower. "I'm going to be very direct with you. The people above me on this project have made decisions about how it proceeds. Your job is to execute the acquisition phase and close the Callaway parcel. That's all. And the water is not your problem." She sat on the bed in the pale morning light of a Texas motel and felt everything she'd been trying to hold in separate boxes, professional and personal, logical and emotional, survivable and not, stop staying separate. "It's their problem," she said. "The 17 families who..." "Clara, stop!" The voice was hard now, the friendliness gone. "I like you. I've always said you're one of the better project coordinators I've worked with. But you need to understand something. If you make this difficult, there are other people who will be brought in to close this deal. And those people will not be as careful with the community relationships as you are. Think about that." She thought about it. She thought about Lily on the fence rail, reading about a spider who made words in silk. She thought about Ethan saying she used to sit by that spring. She thought about Gerald Briggs and his bolo tie and his coffee cup with the Texas flag, saying that's different from being in contact with the people who own the land. "I need to think about some things," Clara said. "Don't think for too long," Preston said, and hung up. Clara sat on the bed for a while. Then she opened her laptop and started looking for everything she could find about the man above Preston Wyatt, the man who was apparently making decisions about how the Red Hollow project proceeded. It took her 20 minutes to find his name. Victor Hale. She'd heard of him vaguely, the kind of name that appeared in business sections occasionally, attached to development projects and real estate deals, and she now noticed as she started reading 2 separate state investigations in the past decade, both of which had been settled out of court. She read for an hour. She read about the Red Hollow project in financial news, buried in a quarterly investor report. She read about Meridian Land Development's parent company structure, which she'd never looked into before, and found Victor Hale's name 3 layers up. Then she opened a new document and started making a list. Everything she knew, everything she'd been told, everything that didn't match. She wasn't sure yet what she was going to do with the list, but she was very sure, in the way of someone who has finally let themselves look at something they'd been avoiding, that she was going to do something. Outside the window, Red Hollow was waking up. A truck went by. Somewhere a dog was barking. The water tower with the old football score stood against a sky that was turning from gray to pale blue. Somewhere about 4 miles east, past the cedar trees and the crumbling county road, a spring was moving cold and clear through the limestone, the same way it had been moving for longer than anyone in that town had been alive. Clara closed the laptop. Then she opened it again and sent the email to Preston Wyatt, the one she'd been sitting on, with one addition. CC, Meridian Legal Department, attention, Ethics Compliance Officer. She put on her boots, the business ones that weren't made for this country, and walked outside into the October morning. She had work to do. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow, it was work she actually meant. The email went out at 8:04 in the morning. By 8:47, Clara's phone was ringing. Not Preston this time, but a number she didn't recognize with a Dallas area code. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from someone named Richard Cho, who identified himself as senior counsel for Meridian and whose voice had the particular flatness of a man accustomed to making problems disappear through patience and paperwork. He said he'd like to discuss her concerns in a constructive manner at her earliest convenience, and that the company took all compliance inquiries seriously, and that he hoped she was enjoying her time in Red Hollow. She didn't call him back. She drove out to the county roads and sat in the Tahoe at the edge of Ethan's eastern pasture with her window down, watching the grass move. The aquifer survey was open on the passenger seat. She'd printed it the night before at the motel's front desk printer, which had taken 11 minutes and jammed twice, and she'd stood there in the fluorescent light of the lobby at midnight waiting for it, feeling like someone who had just set fire to something and wasn't sure yet whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing. Both, probably. Most things were. She was still sitting there when she heard a truck coming down the county road from the north and recognized the dark green F-25O before it slowed. Ethan pulled alongside her, driver's window to driver's window, the way people in rural Texas seemed comfortable doing because there was nobody behind them, because there was always enough space. He looked at the papers on her passenger seat, then at her face, which she suspected told him more than she intended. "You eat breakfast?" he said. "No." "Come up to the house. Lily made eggs." Clara looked at him. "Lily made eggs?" "She's been trying to learn. They're not perfect." A pause. "They're edible." Clara followed the F-25O up the ranch road. The house was a low, wide structure, white-painted wood siding gone slightly gray at the corners, a covered porch running along the front, an old wooden swing that looked like it hadn't been painted since before Lily was born. There were boots on the porch steps, small ones and large ones, mud on both. A dog, some kind of shepherd mix, brown and white, aging, got up slowly from the porch and came to sniff Clara's hand with the measured politeness of an old dog who had learned that most people were probably fine. "That's Roy," Ethan said. "He's 13. He'll follow you around and pretend he's still useful." Roy wagged once, as if he understood this assessment and was at peace with it. Inside, the kitchen smelled like coffee and slightly overcooked eggs. Lily was standing at the stove with a spatula, very serious about it, wearing a flannel shirt that was definitely her father's and had the sleeves rolled up 6 times. There were eggshells on the counter. There was a small pile of toast that had gone a shade past golden. "I burned the toast a little," Lily reported, without looking up from the pan. "But it's fine if you scrape it." "Looks great," Clara said. Lily shot her a look that was extremely skeptical for a 7-year-old. "You haven't seen it yet." Breakfast was slightly overdone eggs and scraped toast and coffee from a machine that looked older than Clara's car. Lily sat between them at the kitchen table and talked about a horse named Pepper who had been limping, and whether Pepper's limping was because of the rocks in the south pasture or because she was getting old, which was a more complicated question, Lily explained, because getting old wasn't something you could fix. Clara drank her coffee and listened and thought about Richard Cho's voicemail and the aquifer numbers, and the way Ethan had looked at her papers through the truck window like he already knew something had changed. When Lily excused herself to feed Roy, Ethan refilled Clara's coffee without asking. "You sent something," he said. It wasn't a question. "To our legal compliance office, yes." "About the spring. About the water draw projections." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "I CC'd ethics compliance. I don't know how much it'll accomplish. Meridian's lawyers they're very good at making things look reasonable." Ethan sat down across from her. He had a coffee too, which he held the same way she did, and for a moment they just sat there on opposite sides of the kitchen table with their coffees, like two people negotiating something that had stopped being a negotiation. "They called you already," he said, 43 minutes after I sent the email, which tells you something about how closely they're monitoring this project. "Yeah." He looked out the kitchen window at the pasture. The morning light was flat and bright, the kind that happens in Texas when there are no clouds to soften it. "What happens to you now?" She'd been thinking about that since midnight. "Probably nothing immediate. They'll try to manage me, bring me in for a conversation, reframe things, explain that I misunderstood the documents. She paused. If that doesn't work, they'll sideline me. Bring in someone else to close the deal. And then? And then I'm done at Meridian. She said it plainly, because it was plain. They don't keep people who create compliance friction on active projects. Ethan looked at her with an expression she was getting better at reading. It wasn't sympathy exactly, more like the thing that comes before sympathy, when you're trying to understand the shape of someone's situation before you decide what to feel about it. This job is what you came here for, he said. Yes. The money. Yes. And now you... He stopped. Seemed to be choosing the next words carefully, which she'd noticed he tended to do. You're sure about this? Sending that email? Clara looked at the table. There was a ring from a coffee cup that had been set there many times, a permanent ghost of a habit. Beside it, Lily had left a crayon drawing, something that might be a horse, or a dog, or an unusually four-legged bird. The spring feeds 17 properties, she said. I keep coming back to that number. 17. That's not an abstraction. Those are wells that go dry, animals that need water, people who... She stopped. I've spent my whole professional life being practical. I've been practical about things I shouldn't have been practical about. And I told myself it was because of my situation, my debt, Another stop. At some point that stops being a reason and starts being an excuse. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, where does that leave you? I don't know yet. She looked up. It depends partly on what you do with this information. He held her gaze. Outside, they could hear Lily talking to Roy in the patient, explanatory way that children talk to animals, as if the animal is a reasonable party who simply lacks context. Tell me about the annexure, Ethan said. So she told him. All of it. The water draw numbers and the aquifer yield and the 7-year depletion estimate. She laid the printed survey on the table and walked him through it the way she'd been walking herself through it for the past week, and Ethan listened with his forearms on the table and his eyes moving between her face and the documents. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. My great-grandfather drilled that aquifer in 1923, he said finally. The well's still functional. The spring it connects to has been running longer than any record in this county goes back. He looked at the survey. 7 years. At maximum draw, could be longer with conservation measures, but yes, in that range. He put his hand flat on the table. Not a gesture, just setting it down, like he needed something solid. Who is above Preston Wyatt, he said. A man named Victor Hale. He's the chairman of Meridian's parent company. Something moved across Ethan's face. A recognition, brief, contained, but there. You know that name, Clara said. I've heard it. He picked up his coffee. About a year ago, someone from a company I'd never heard of contacted me about purchasing the ranch. The name on the letter was different company, different project. But the land they were describing was the same land, same acreage, same eastern boundary. He paused. I looked into it. That company had the same parent structure as 2 other failed land deals in West Texas that I'd read about. I declined, and I didn't hear from them again. Clara stared at him. You've been watching this. I know what this land is worth, he said, and I know what it would mean to the wrong person to own the water rights. You knew this wasn't just a development deal. I suspected. He set the mug down. I didn't have what you have. He tapped the printed survey with one finger. This is evidence. This is numbers and surveys and documented projections. This is the difference between suspicion and proof. Clara looked at the documents on the kitchen table. She'd come to Red Hollow to take this man's land. She'd spent a week and a half gathering evidence that was now the best tool he had to fight the company she worked for. She wasn't sure how to feel about the geometry of that, except that it seemed like justice, which was a word she hadn't used about her professional life in a very long time. What do you want to do with it? She said. I want to talk to a lawyer. He said it without drama, like it was obvious, which it was. I have one in Abilene I've worked with before, land law. He's good. A pause. I want to talk to the other families, too. If their water's at risk, they need to know. Meridian will push back. They have a legal department that... I know what Meridian has. He said it calmly, not cutting her off, just stating it. I also know what this land has. 112 years of uninterrupted private ownership, water rights documented back to territorial law, and a spring that 17 families have been depending on without interruption. That's not nothing. His eyes met hers. And now I have someone who was inside the company with documented concerns about a compliance issue that directly affects that water source. Clara understood what he was saying. She sat with it for a moment. That would put me in a difficult position, she said. Yes. He didn't soften it. It would. The kitchen was quiet. Roy had come back inside and was lying under the table with his chin on Ethan's boot. Lily was somewhere down the hall, making the particular kind of noise that children make when they're entertaining themselves, low and narrative, a running commentary on something only they could see. How difficult? Clara asked. Depends on what Meridian does. If they accept the compliance concerns and revise the project, you might be all right. You did the right thing through proper channels. He paused. If they don't, if this goes to state regulators or a court, then you become a material witness, a source, a person who gathered the documents. Another pause. There are lawyers who'd call that whistleblowing. She'd thought about that word. She'd been trying not to think about it too directly, the way you avoid looking at something bright until your eyes adjust. Whistleblower. It was a word that meant something specific in terms of legal protections and also in terms of what your professional life looked like on the other side of it. I have $400 in savings, Clara said. Ethan looked at her. I'm not telling you that for sympathy, she said quickly. I'm telling you because it's relevant. I took this job because I needed the income, and the bonus from this deal would have changed my financial situation significantly. I have student debt and a medical bill, and she stopped. I'm not in a position to be brave without consequence. Nobody is, he said. Being brave without consequence is just preference. She blinked at that. You've already done something, he said. That email exists. You sent it at 8 in the morning to your company's ethics compliance office, and you CC'd legal, and you did it knowing what it would probably cost you. That's already done. He wasn't being warm about it. He was just being accurate. The question now is what comes next. What comes next could cost me a lot more than the job. Yes. He held her gaze. I know. And you're asking me to do it anyway? No. He shook his head. I'm telling you what the situation is. What you do is yours. He picked up his coffee again. But I'll tell you this. If you're willing to stand with us on this, you won't be standing alone. Clara looked at him across the kitchen table in the October light. This man who made his daughter breakfast every morning and repaired his own fences and talked about water rights the way other people talked about family, who had offered her scraped toast and coffee and the truth of the situation without trying to make any of it softer than it was. She thought about the $412. She thought about Preston Wyatt's voice. She thought about Richard Cho's voicemail and the careful flatness of it, the institutional assurance that everything would be handled. I'm going to need your lawyer's number, she said. Something changed in Ethan's face. Not dramatically. He wasn't a dramatic man. But something settled, like a piece of something that had been leaning against a wall finally found its footing. I'll call him today, he said. From down the hall, Lily's voice rose into something that was definitely a hoarse impression, accompanied by what sounded like Roy's reluctant participation. Ethan looked toward the hallway, and something about his expression, just briefly, just for a second, was the thing you see on the faces of people who are holding more than they show. Then it went back to steady the way it always did. The way Clara was beginning to understand was not indifference, but practice. The long practice of a man who'd learned that steady was the only thing he could afford to be. She left the ranch 40 minutes later with a name and number written on the back of a Meridian business card. The card she'd given him at the feed store, now repurposed, which felt appropriate, and drove back toward the motel with the windows down and the cold October air coming through and the printed survey riding on the passenger seat like a verdict. Her phone rang at noon. This time it was Preston. She answered. Clara. His voice was doing something new, a studied neutrality that she recognized as expensive. Someone had coached him between this morning and now. I'd like to propose a conversation. A proper one, face to face. I'm flying to Abilene tomorrow. I thought we could sit down together, clarify some things about the project scope. Flying from Dallas to Abilene, she said, for a conversation. I think it's worth the trip. What changed between this morning and now? A pause. Nothing's changed. I've always been committed to open communication on this project. She almost laughed. Preston, when you called me this morning, you told me the water issue was not my problem. I may have been too abrupt. It's been a stressful quarter. It has, she agreed. I'll meet with you. Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock. Patsy's Diner on Main Street in Red Hollow. She chose the location deliberately. Not neutral, not a conference room, not anywhere that felt like Meridian's terrain. A beat. That's fine, that works. Good. She paused. Bring the engineering projections. The full ones, not the summary. And the Water Rights Amendment, version 2. I know there's a version 2 because the document metadata shows a revision date 2 weeks after the version I have. Silence. 3 o'clock, Clara said, and hung up. She sat in the parking lot of the Lone Star Inn for a minute. Then she took out her personal laptop, not her work laptop, her personal one, the 5-year-old thing she used for everything that wasn't Meridian's business, and started organizing her files. She had more than she'd realized when she laid it all out. The aquifer survey, the annexure, the engineering projections cross-reference, email chains from the past week where Preston had said things that read differently now that she was reading them as evidence, her own communications requesting county records, time-stamped, documented, a professional record of a woman doing her job, asking the right questions, and being told repeatedly to stop asking them. She organized it into folders, made copies, sent a copy to her personal email and another to a cloud storage account she'd had since college. Then she called her mother in Corpus Christi. Her mother answered on the second ring because she always answered on the second ring, as if she'd learned early that the first ring was for bracing yourself and everything after was just response. Clara, baby, how's Texas? It's Texas, Clara said. Mom, I might be in a complicated situation with work. A pause. Then her mother, who had worked double shifts in a hospital laundry for 30 years and knew something about complicated situations, said, How complicated? I might lose the job. Another pause. Her mother had strong feelings about financial security, for obvious and painful reasons, and Clara waited for those feelings to arrive in the form of gentle but pointed questions about her savings and her debt and whether she'd thought this through. Instead, her mother said, Is it the right thing? Clara watched a red-tailed hawk sitting on a fence post across the highway, absolutely still, watching the grass. Yeah, Clara said. I think it is. Then lose the job. Her mother said it like it was obvious, like it was the simplest math in the world. You can't afford to do the wrong thing. You never could. Clara sat with that for a moment. I love you, she said. I know. A pause. You eating enough? Don't just drink coffee. I had eggs this morning. Good. Whose eggs? A 7-year-old made them. Were they any good? Not really, Clara said. Her mother laughed. Okay, call me. She hung up and sat in the parking lot until the hawk finally lifted off the fence post, caught something invisible in the updraft, and circled east over the pasture. Then she went inside, opened her laptop, and started preparing for the meeting with Preston. Preston arrived at Patsy's at 3:15, which was 15 minutes late, which Clara understood as a statement. He was exactly what she'd imagined from his voice on the phone. Late 40s, good suit that was slightly wrong for the geography, a leather portfolio that probably cost $800. He looked at the diner, the Formica counters, and the mounted bass on the wall and the TV still playing local news nobody was watching, and did something with his expression that he probably thought was professional neutrality. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. Clara had the engineering projections on the table in front of her, her own copy. She'd gotten there at 2:45, and she'd chosen a corner booth where she could see the door, and she'd had a piece of peach pie, which was the best thing she'd eaten since she arrived in Red Hollow, and she felt the steadiness of a person who has decided something and is no longer in the process of deciding. Preston laid his portfolio on the table and opened it. His own documents, organized, corporate. He'd clearly had someone prepare something. I appreciate you making time, he said. Of course. She folded her hands. Did you bring the version 2 Water Rights Amendment? His jaw did something small and controlled. I brought the complete project documentation, yes, including version 2. Clara, he leaned forward slightly, I want to have an honest conversation. I'd love that. The compliance email, he paused. It's created some friction. At the senior level, people who have invested significantly in this project and who are, understandably, concerned about the implications. What are the implications they're concerned about? That a member of the acquisition team is raising legal flags that could delay or restructure a project at critical phase. He spread his hands. That's not a small thing. No, Clara agreed, it's not. Because if the project proceeds as currently structured, it will deplete the primary water source for 17 properties in the area within 7 years. She tapped the engineering projections. That's not a legal flag. That's a harm. Those are different things. Preston looked at the projections. Environmental modeling is... This isn't environmental modeling. This is arithmetic. The draw rate in the engineering projections exceeds the documented sustainable yield of the aquifer by nearly 2 to 1. That math doesn't change based on who's interpreting it. He picked up his coffee, put it down, picked up his pen. There are mitigation options that... Are they in the documents? A pause. Are there documented mitigation options for the water draw in the project files? Clara said. Because I've read everything I have access to and I haven't found them. Silence. Preston. She kept her voice even. I have been in this county for 2 weeks. In that time, I've met the families whose properties depend on that spring. I've talked to county officials who have spent their careers understanding this land. And I've read every document Meridian gave me, plus some I found through public record. Boss, imantis. She let that sit. I'm not going back to Dallas with unsigned papers and a cleaned-up story. I'm not going to tell Ethan Calloway that the project's fine and the water's going to be okay, because I can't say that truthfully, and I won't say it untruthfully. Bishpatbi. She paused. So I need to know, is there a version of this project that doesn't destroy the aquifer? Because if there is, I'd like to see it. And if there isn't, I need to know that too. Preston sat across from her with his $800 portfolio and his untouched coffee, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked something other than assured. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to manage something and found that the thing had already decided how it was going to go. He was quiet for a long time. Victor Hale wants this project, he said finally. His voice was lower now, more private. Not Meridian wants this. Victor Hale specifically. He has for years. There have been 2 previous attempts, different company names, different approaches. Red Hollow has been on his acquisition list for a long time. Clara went still. What Ethan had told her that morning, about the letter a year ago, the different company, the same land, clicked into place like a key. Why? She said. Because the water rights, Preston said, almost quietly, are worth more than the land. The aquifer sits under the most rapidly developing corridor in this part of Texas. In 10 years, when this region grows the way the projections say it will, whoever controls that water controls. A lot. He stopped. Victor is not stupid. He's thought a long way ahead. Clara stared at him. The development project is a front. The development project is real, Preston said carefully, but it is not the primary objective. She sat back, felt something cold move through her that wasn't the diner's air conditioning. How many people at Meridian know this? She said. Not many. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that surprised her. Not guilt exactly, but something tired. The expression of a man who has been carrying something uncomfortable for a while and isn't sure what to do about the weight of it. Enough. Do you know it? He looked at his coffee. I know what I know, he said. It wasn't an answer. It was the shape of an answer when someone isn't ready to say the word yet. Clara gathered her documents. She did it slowly, carefully, the way she did everything in this diner, deliberately, because everything in the past 2 weeks had taught her that deliberate was better than fast. I'm going to give you 1 week, she said, to produce a revised project plan with documented alternative water sourcing that doesn't impact the existing aquifer. She put the papers in her bag. If that plan exists, I will continue the acquisition process in good faith. If it doesn't, she paused. Then we both know where this goes. Preston watched her. And if Victor Hale decides he doesn't want to wait a week, then Victor Hale will find out that one of his acquisition coordinators spent 2 weeks gathering documentation of water rights violations and sent them to the Ethics Compliance Department and that this information is currently in the hands of a land attorney in Abilene. She looked at him steadily. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. She left a 20 on the table for the pie and the coffee and walked out of Patsy's into the October afternoon. The street was quiet. A truck went by with hay bales in the bed. An older woman came out of the post office and waved at nobody in particular. Somewhere down Maine, a radio was playing something country from a decade ago, the kind of song that sounded like it understood something about losing things. Clara stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel clean. She felt the way she imagined you felt when you'd cut something loose that you'd been carrying a long time. Not free yet, just lighter. Like the weight was still there, just arranged differently. She took out her phone and called Ethan's number. He answered on the second ring. How'd it go? He said. He confirmed it, she said. The water rights are the primary target. The development project is real, but secondary. Victor Hale has been trying to acquire this land and this aquifer for years. Different companies, different approaches. A pause on his end. The letter last year. Yes. She heard him exhale slowly, not dramatically, just the sound of a man receiving information that confirmed something he'd feared. I gave them a week, she said, to produce a revised plan. They won't. No, he agreed. They won't. Which means after a week this goes somewhere else. She paused. Your lawyer, is he ready to move? He's already moving, Ethan said. He filed for an injunction on the survey access this morning. County judge is a former water rights attorney. Another pause. He says the documentation you have changes things considerably. Clara stood on the Main Street sidewalk in Red Hollow, Texas, $412 in her savings account, no certain job, a legal situation that was about to get significantly more complicated, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, maybe longer. Something that didn't have a clean name, not happiness. It was too cold and uncertain for happiness. Not peace. There was too much ahead of them for peace. Maybe just the feeling of being in the right place, doing the right thing, which was its own complicated reward, even when the right thing was expensive. Down the street, through the window of Patsy's, she could see Preston Wyatt still sitting in the booth with his untouched coffee and his leather portfolio, looking at the table. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just understood something that he'd been paid not to understand. Clara turned away from the window and walked toward her car. The afternoon light in Red Hollow was long and flat and golden the way it got in late October, lying across everything at an angle that made even the ordinary things, the water tower, the feed store, the crumbling sidewalk, look like they meant something. She was pretty sure they did. The week Preston had been given did not last a week. On Thursday morning, 4 days after the Patsy's Diner meeting, 3 days after Ethan's lawyer filed the injunction, 2 days after the county judge acknowledged receipt and requested a response from Meridian's legal team, Clara's work laptop locked her out. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment she was reviewing a document, and the next the screen went gray, and a single line of text appeared telling her that her credentials had been suspended pending an internal review. She stared at it for a moment, then closed the laptop. She'd expected it. She'd even told herself she'd expected it. But there's a difference between knowing something is coming and having it arrive. The same way there's a difference between knowing a storm is forecast and standing in the rain. She sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at the closed laptop and felt the particular silence of a professional life going quiet. Her phone rang. Not Preston, not Richard Cho. A number she didn't recognize at all, which she'd learned in the past week was usually a sign that someone was working hard to be untraceable. She answered, Miss Dawson. The voice was male, smooth, and carried the kind of authority that people spend decades cultivating. Not loud, not aggressive, just the voice of a person who had never once in their adult life been in a room where they weren't the most important person present. My name is Victor Hale. I believe you know who I am. Clara stood up from the bed and went to the window. Outside, the Lone Star Inn parking lot was empty except for her Tahoe and a truck belonging to whoever was in room 7. The sky was overcast. First time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow that the sky had been anything other than clear. I know who you are, she said. Good. Then I'll skip the introduction. A pause, brief, the pause of someone who uses silence professionally. I understand you've had some concerns about the project documents. I also understand you've taken some actions that have created complications. Another pause. I'd like to discuss all of that directly, if you're open to it. She'd been expecting pressure. She hadn't expected Victor Hale to make the call himself. That told her something. Either things had escalated faster than she'd anticipated, or he was a man who preferred to handle important problems personally. From what she'd read about him, probably both. I'm open to a conversation, she said. Excellent. The word landed warmly, which made her trust it less. I want you to know that I have a great deal of respect for what you did. Raising compliance concerns it's the right instinct. It tells me you're good at this job. Thank you. I think there's been a miscommunication about the project scope, specifically about the water sourcing. He spoke carefully, precisely, like someone reading from a document they'd written themselves. Our engineering team has developed mitigation options that weren't properly communicated to the acquisition team. That's an internal failure, and I take responsibility for it. Clara looked at the overcast sky. I'd like to see those mitigation options. Of course, I'm having them prepared. A pause. I'd also like to offer you something, Clara. May I call you Clara? She noted the pivot. First name, offered mid-sentence. An intimacy introduced without asking for permission, only for confirmation. Sure, I'd like to offer you a senior role in the project. Not acquisition, development coordination. Overseeing the entire Red Hollow phase with direct reporting to me. Another pause, for wait. The compensation would reflect that responsibility. Significantly better than your current package. The motel room was very still. Claire could hear the vending machine in the hallway humming through the wall. She thought about the aquifer numbers. She thought about Preston saying Victor Hale has been trying to acquire this land for years. She thought about Ethan's face when she'd told him the water rights were the primary target. That short exhale, the confirmation of something he'd feared. I appreciate the offer, she said. I'd need to see the mitigation documentation before I could respond to anything else. Of course. Warm again, smooth again. I'll have something to you by tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I hope you'll hold off on any further external communication about the project. External communication. The information you've shared with the Callaway legal team. He said it gently, like he was describing something she might have done by accident. It complicates things. I'm sure you understand. Clara understood clearly. She was being asked to pause her cooperation with Ethan's lawyer in exchange for a job promotion and documents that may or may not address the actual problem and may or may not arrive. I'll look for the documentation tomorrow morning, she said. Perfect. The warmth in his voice was the kind that comes with certainty. The warmth of a man who had rarely been told no by someone in her position. I have a feeling we're going to work very well together, Clara. He hung up. She stood at the window for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Ethan. He answered before the second ring. I heard your laptop access was revoked. She blinked. How? Gerald Briggs has a nephew who works in county IT. Meridian's been requesting data access through the county network. When they lock out an internal account, it shows in the log. He paused. Gerald watches things. Victor Hale called me, Clara said. A long pause. Did he? He offered me a promotion. Senior Development Coordinator, direct report to him. She moved away from the window, sat back on the bed. He also said there are mitigation documents that weren't communicated properly to the acquisition team. He's sending them tomorrow. Are you going to wait for them? No. She said it with a certainty that surprised her slightly. Not because she'd been uncertain, but because the certainty had arrived so quickly, so cleanly. But I want to see what they send, because whatever it is will tell us something about how they plan to manage this. You think they'll fake documentation? I think they'll send something real that's framed in a way that obscures the problem. She paused. Victor Hale didn't get where he is by being sloppy. He gets where he is by being very careful about what he shows people and when. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Can you come out here tomorrow? My lawyer wants to talk through everything in person. James, that's his name, James Ritter. He's driving in from Abilene. He's been talking to some people in Austin, too. Environmental law contacts. State level. State level, Claire said. What Hale is doing, or trying to do. It may not just be Red Hollow. James is looking at the previous acquisition attempts in West Texas. The ones with different company names. He thinks there's a pattern. She thought about the reading she'd done that first night. The 2 state investigations, both settled out of court. Both settled, which meant both paid, which meant both real. "I'll be there at 9, she said. The documents from Victor Hale arrived at 7:23 the next morning, sent to her personal email since her work access was suspended, which meant someone at Meridian had looked up her personal contact through public record, which was a small violation that said something about how they operated when they needed something. She read them over breakfast. Motel coffee, a gas station granola bar she'd bought the night before. The documents laid out on the small desk beside the window with the gray sky outside. The mitigation plan was real. That much was true. It described an alternative water sourcing option, a municipal pipeline extension from the nearest town, roughly 11 miles, that would supply the development project's water needs without drawing from the existing aquifer. It was technically feasible. Engineers had signed off on it. The problem was in the timeline. The municipal pipeline would take 3 to 5 years to complete. The development project's Phase 1 was set to begin drawing groundwater in 8 months. The gap between those two numbers was 4 years minimum. 4 years of pulling from an aquifer already documented as stressed. The mitigation plan didn't eliminate the problem. It just scheduled it differently and added a resolution that would arrive after the damage was already done. Clara photographed every page. She emailed the photos to herself and to the cloud account. Then she drove out to the Callaway Ranch. James Ritter was not what she'd expected. She'd built an image of a land law attorney from Abilene in her head that involved bolo ties and deliberate speech, something in the Gerald Briggs register. James was 42, looked younger, wore a regular button-down shirt and no jacket, and spoke faster than almost anyone she'd encountered in this part of Texas. He had the energy of a man who had been awake since 5 and had opinions about most things. He was sitting at Ethan's kitchen table with 3 open laptops and a stack of physical files that suggested he'd brought approximately everything with him from Abilene, including possibly the furniture. Lily had been dispatched to a neighbor's property for the morning. Roy was under the table, being old and dignified about all the activity. James looked up when Clara walked in. "The Meridian coordinator," he said, with the particular attention of someone who has been reading about you. "Former coordinator," Clara said. "Right. They locked you out." He said it without ceremony, like it was a piece of data to file. "Sit down. I want to show you something." What James wanted to show her was a map. Not a property survey. A different kind of map. One he'd built himself, pulling together public records and corporate filings from the past 9 years. It was a map of land acquisitions across a 60-mile corridor in West Texas, color-coded by parent company. 5 different company names. 3 different project types: development, agricultural, infrastructure. All different enough on the surface to look unconnected. All traceable, if you were patient and knew what to look for, to the same parent company structure, to the same man. "Victor Hale has been assembling parcels," James said, tracing the map with a pen. "Not randomly. These parcels," he pointed to a cluster east of Red Hollow, "sit directly over the Edwards Trinity Aquifer System, the largest groundwater reserve in this part of Texas. You control the surface rights over enough of this land, you control access to the water underneath it." He looked up. "And you control a legal framework for drawing from that water that's extremely difficult to challenge. Because water law in Texas is the rule of capture," Clara said. James pointed at her. "The rule of capture. In Texas, groundwater belongs to whoever pumps it. Period. There are exceptions, but they're narrow and they're hard to enforce. If Hale gets the surface rights and establishes pumping infrastructure, he can draw that aquifer legally, within certain limits. And those limits are..." He made a gesture that communicated the limits were not impressive. "How much is the aquifer worth?" Ethan asked. He was leaning against the kitchen counter with his coffee. He'd been quiet since Clara arrived, listening. At current projections for regional development, James looked at his notes. "The water rights over this corridor in 10 years, conservatively. We're talking about something in the range of $8 to $12 billion in contracted supply value." Silence in the kitchen. "Billion," Clara said. "The corridor between San Angelo and Abilene is one of the fastest-growing development zones in the state. Residential, industrial, agricultural, all of it needs water. All of it is going to need significantly more water in a decade." James set down his pen. Someone who owns the infrastructure to supply that water owns something that makes every other kind of real estate look modest. Clara thought about Victor Hale on the phone. The smoothness, the patience, the promotion offer. A man managing a billion-dollar play didn't sweat an acquisition coordinator. He offered her the job because it was cheaper and easier than a fight. He expected her to take it. The mitigation plan he sent, she said, and described what she'd read that morning. The timeline gap. The 4 years. James nodded like he had expected it. It's designed to look like a solution. It addresses the specific concern you raised, water draw, while preserving the operational timeline. By the time the municipal pipeline is complete, the aquifer has already been compromised. He can point to the documentation and say he had a plan. That's fraud, Ethan said. James tilted his head. It's sophisticated concealment. Whether it meets the legal standard for fraud depends on what we can prove about intent. That's the harder thing. He paused. Unless we find something more direct. Clara looked at her hands, then at the map on the table. She'd been thinking about something since the phone call. Something Victor Hale had said, not in content, but in approach. The way he'd moved to her immediately. The promotion offer. The request to pause external communication. He's afraid of something specific, she said. Both men looked at her. When he called, he didn't try to discredit me. He didn't threaten. He moved directly to co-option. Bring me inside. Give me a title. Make it in my interest to be quiet. She looked at James. That's not what you do when you think you're airtight. That's what you do when there's something you don't want discovered. James looked at her for a long moment. What do you think it is? I don't know. But it's in the documents I don't have access to. She paused. The ones I never had access to. The previous acquisition attempts? The ones in West Texas that failed? What happened to them? Both settled out of court, James said. With what terms? He shuffled through his files. Read for a moment. Non-disclosure agreements? From the landowners, financial settlements, amounts sealed. He looked up. Standard suppression. What happened to the internal documents from those deals? James stared at her. They'd be with Meridian's parent company, locked, or with whoever structured the deals, she said. The lawyers, the contractors, the people who did the actual work. She paused. Preston Wyatt has been with Meridian for 11 years. He said he knows what he knows about the project. He didn't say it like someone who was proud of it. Ethan set his coffee down. You think Preston might cooperate? I think Preston is a man who has been carrying something uncomfortable and is running out of reasons why the discomfort is worth it. She'd been thinking about his face in Patsy's diner, that tired expression, the one that wasn't quite guilt. He's not a bad person. He's a person who has been doing bad things carefully, and those are different, and sometimes the difference matters. James looked at Ethan. Something passed between them. The particular communication of two people who've known each other long enough to speak in glances. Can you get him to meet? James asked Clara. She thought about it. Preston had called her twice since the Hale conversation. She hadn't answered. He'd left voicemails that were careful and professional and had that same tired quality underneath the professionalism. Maybe, she said, not as a Meridian meeting, personal. Think about it, James said. In the meantime, he slid a folder across the table. I need you to write a formal affidavit about everything you observed, gathered, and were told during your time as project coordinator. Dates, conversations, document specifics, all of it. Clara looked at the folder. This was the moment she'd been moving toward. Not the compliance email, not the Patsy's meeting, not even the Hale phone call. This was the formal step. The one with her name on it, signed, submitted to a legal process. She picked up the folder. Do you have a pen? She said. James produced 3, which seemed about right. She spent the next 2 hours at Ethan's kitchen table writing the affidavit. James walked her through the structure, what was needed, how to frame it for legal relevance without overstating. Ethan made more coffee and at some point produced a plate of sandwiches that nobody had asked for, which was a thing Clara was noticing he did. He didn't ask what people needed, he just assessed and provided, quietly, without annotation. The writing was harder than she expected. Not because she didn't remember. She remembered everything clearly. The specific documents and the specific conversations and the specific silences. But because putting it into sworn statement language made it real in a different way. She had to be precise about what she'd seen versus what she'd inferred. Precise about what Preston had said explicitly versus what she'd understood from context. Precision, in legal documentation, is a demanding discipline. By noon, she had 11 pages. James read them, made 3 small corrections, then looked at her with something that was close to approval. "This is good," he said. "This is genuinely good. Will it be enough?" For the injunction, yes. To block survey access and potentially the entire Phase 1, yes. He closed the folder. For what comes after, what Hale has been doing across this corridor, the larger pattern, we need more. The previous acquisition documents, Clara said, and ideally someone from inside who can speak to intent, not just structure. Someone who knows what the plan actually was. He paused. Preston Wyatt. She looked at Ethan. He was at the counter again, looking out the kitchen window at the pasture. The overcast had started to thin and the pale light was coming through, catching the dry grass and making it look almost gold. "I'll call him," she said. She went outside to make the call. The porch was cold, the wooden swing moving slightly in the wind. Roy followed her and arranged himself at her feet with the ease of a dog who considers most places appropriate for lying down. Preston answered after 4 rings. "Clara." "I'm not calling about the project," she said. I'm calling because I think you're in a difficult position, and I think you know it, and I think a conversation might be useful for both of us." A long silence. She could hear him breathing. Could hear what sounded like an office. The low hum of a Dallas building, a door closing somewhere. "I'm being managed," he said finally, which wasn't what she'd expected and was possibly the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. "I know. Hale." He stopped. Started again. "When I took this job, I understood that large development deals involved." Another stop. "I told myself there was a difference between aggressive and wrong, that the line was clear and I was on the right side of it." "When did that change?" "Gradually. And then," he exhaled, "and then all at once." The porch swing moved. Roy pressed his chin against her ankle. "James Ritter is a land attorney in Abilene," Clara said. "He's looking at the entire corridor, not just Red Hollow. He has the corporate structure documentation going back 9 years. She paused. "He's not interested in Meridian employees who cooperated under direction. He's interested in Victor Hale." Another long silence. "What would cooperation look like?" Preston said. The word cooperation, said in that tone, cautious, conditional, not yet a yes, was the most important thing she'd heard since she arrived in Texas. "Conversation first. Nothing formal yet. You tell James what you know about the previous acquisition attempts and the water rights strategy. He tells you what protections might be available." She paused. "You have a lawyer?" "I have a personal lawyer, yes. Not Meridian's. Call them today. Before anything else." She meant it. "Don't do anything without your own counsel involved." "Clara." His voice was strange, something in it she'd never heard before in all their professional history. Smaller, maybe. More personal. "I want you to know that I knew this deal was wrong before you arrived in Red Hollow. I knew it, and He stopped for a long time. "I sent you anyway." She sat with that for a moment. The weight of it and the honesty of it, and the complicated mixture of things that came with both. "I know," she said. "Call your lawyer, Preston." She hung up and sat on the porch in the cold air, Roy's warm weight against her feet, the sky breaking up above the pasture into pale blue between the clouds. When she went back inside, both Ethan and James looked at her. "He'll talk," she said. "He needs to call his own lawyer first, but he'll talk." James sat back and did something with his shoulders that might have been relief. "When?" "Give him a few days?" She looked at Ethan. "This is going to get louder before it gets quieter. You know that." He nodded once. The particular nod of a man who had been expecting something to be hard for a while and had made his arrangements. "Lily's going to notice things," he said. "She already has. She asked me this morning if we were going to lose the ranch." "What did you tell her?" "I told her no." He said it straight, no qualifying hesitation. Then, "I told her that the right answer isn't always the easy one, but it's still the right one." Clara looked at him. How'd she take that? She said. He paused, and something moved across his face. The brief, involuntary kind of expression that comes with remembering something your child said. She said, "Okay, but we should also keep Roy because he's too old to learn new things." Clara laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes up before you can manage it. Ethan's mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close. James, who had been gathering his files, looked between them with the expression of a man who had walked into a situation that had more layers than the ones he was being paid to address. "I'll be in touch," he said, with the mild emphasis of someone indicating that the meeting was technically over, but that the situation certainly wasn't. He left. His car, a practical, unsentimental sedan, raised a small trail of dust down the ranch road. Ethan walked Clara to her car. They stood beside the Tahoe for a moment in the pale afternoon light, the wind coming across the pasture and carrying the smell of dry grass and cold earth that Clara had come to associate specifically with this place, this particular corner of Texas, in a way she hadn't expected when she first drove into town with her travel mug and her company car and her 2-week timeline. "You don't have to stay in Red Hollow," Ethan said. "The affidavit is submitted. James has what he needs for now. You could go back to Dallas, wait for the legal process." She'd thought about this. She'd thought about her apartment and her savings account and the particular loneliness of waiting in a city for something happening somewhere else. "Is there a reason to stay?" she said. It came out differently than she intended. Not professional, not strategic, just the question. He looked at her. The October light made everything look like it was at an angle, leaning slightly, the whole landscape tilted towards something. "There's 17 families who are going to have questions," he said. "They're going to want to understand what's happening and why. Someone who can explain the documents in plain language would be useful." He paused. "And Lily's been asking whether you'll come back." "Has she?" "She wants to show you the spring," he said. "She's been wanting to take you down there since—" He stopped. "Since she found out you were trying to protect it." Clara looked at the pasture. The wind moved through the grass and the sky was breaking up into wider patches of pale blue, and somewhere down the ranch road she could hear the distant sound of cattle. "I'll stay a while longer," she said. She said it like it was simple. And maybe it was. And maybe the simple things were the ones worth holding on to when everything else got complicated. 3 days later, Victor Hale sent a cease and desist letter to James Ritter's firm in Abilene, alleging improper use of confidential Meridian documents. James responded the same afternoon with a 3-page letter citing public record law, whistleblower protections, and the specific language of a 2019 Texas Supreme Court ruling on groundwater rights. He sent Clara a copy with a note at the bottom that said, "This is where it gets interesting." She was sitting on Ethan's porch when she read it. Roy was next to her. Lily was inside learning to make something on the stove that she'd described, with great seriousness, as advanced soup. The ranch stretched out in every direction, brown and gold and quiet, in the way of things that have been in one place long enough to become certain of themselves. Clara read James's letter twice. Then she thought about Victor Hale, who had spent years assembling a quiet empire underground, literally in the ground, in the water under the ground, with patience and money and the particular confidence of someone who'd never been stopped before. She thought about what it must have felt like to be that certain. She thought about how it would feel when it cracked. From inside the house, she heard Lily say, with great authority, "It's not burnt, it's caramelized." And Ethan's voice, dry, from somewhere near the stove, "There's a difference." "I know there's a difference," Lily said. "I caramelized it on purpose." Clara folded the letter and put it in her jacket pocket. She looked out at the pasture. The grass was dry and the sky was wide, and somewhere under all of it, running cold through the limestone in the dark, the spring was moving the way it had always moved, the way it would keep moving if they had anything to say about it. She thought they probably did. Preston Wyatt drove into Red Hollow on a Saturday morning in a personal car, a gray Volvo sedan that was distinctly not a company vehicle, and sat in the Patsy's parking lot for 11 minutes before going inside. Clara knew this because she was already inside in the corner booth, and she could see the parking lot through the window. She watched him sit in the car. She didn't go out to get him. She understood that some decisions need to finish arriving on their own. When he finally came through the door, he looked different from the man who'd met her here 2 weeks ago. The expensive suit was gone. He was wearing a regular jacket, dark slacks, the kind of outfit that said he'd thought about what to wear in a way that suggested he didn't know who he was dressing for anymore. He'd lost some of the smooth professional surface that had always been his most visible feature. What was underneath it was older and more uncertain, and Clara thought probably more real. He slid into the booth across from her, didn't say anything right away, looked at the laminated menu as if reading it, which he wasn't. "I spoke to my lawyer," he said finally. "Good." She said, he set the menu down. "She said I have exposure, potentially significant exposure, depending on what's provable about what I knew and when I knew it." "I'm sorry," Clara said, and meant it without making it soft. He looked at her. "You know the strange thing? I feel more—" He stopped. "I feel less terrible than I have in about 8 months, which makes no sense given that 8 months ago I still had a job." "It makes sense," she said. A waitress came. Preston ordered coffee. Clara already had hers. When the waitress left, Preston opened the briefcase he'd carried in and set a USB drive on the table. Just set it there between the coffee mugs like it was an ordinary thing. "That's everything I have personal copies of," he said. "Not Meridian servers, things I kept. Emails, internal memos, meeting notes." He looked at it. "There's a document on there from about 14 months ago. Internal strategy memo, from Hale's office to the senior acquisition team." He paused. "It uses the word aquifer 17 times. It uses the word development 3 times. Clara looked at the drive. "It's not ambiguous," Preston said, "about what the primary objective is." She picked it up. It was a standard USB drive, the small kind, with a piece of masking tape on it with a number written in pen. She turned it over in her fingers. "Preston," she said, "I need to ask you something directly." "Okay." "When you sent me to Red Hollow, knowing what you knew about the project, what did you think was going to happen?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck pulled into the parking lot, and 2 men in ranch clothes got out and came inside talking about something she couldn't hear. "I thought you'd close the deal," he said. "I thought you were good enough at the job that you'd find a way to make it work without looking too closely at the parts that didn't, and He exhaled. "I told myself that was a compliment, that I was trusting you with something difficult." He looked at the table. "That's not what it was." "No, I was using you as a buffer," he said. "If the deal closed cleanly, good. If someone pushed back on the water issue, it would be your name on the acquisition documents, not mine." He looked up. "I'm telling you that because I think you deserve to know it, and because I'll probably have to say it officially at some point, and I'd rather you hear it from me first." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She'd known this, in the way you know things you'd rather not have to acknowledge directly. Preston was not a monster. He was something more ordinary, and in some ways more troubling. A person of reasonable intelligence and no particular cruelty who had made a series of small decisions that collectively added up to something wrong and had hidden the addition from himself until hiding it became too expensive. "What do you need to make this right?" she said. "I need to talk to James Ritter," he said. "And I need my lawyer in the room." He paused. "And I think I need to not work at Meridian after this." "That's probably accurate." "Yeah." He picked up his coffee. "I've been there 11 years. "I know." He drank his coffee. She drank hers. The diner was filling up with Saturday morning people, families, ranch hands, a group of older men who appeared to have a permanent reservation at the counter. The TV in the corner was showing college football highlights with the sound off. "One more thing," Preston said. He reached back into the briefcase and produced a single printed page, folded in thirds. "This is the contact information for both landowners who settled with Hale's companies in the previous West Texas deals. They signed NDAs, but—" He set it on the table. "NDAs don't cover testimony in a regulatory proceeding. They cover public disclosure. There's a difference." He paused. "My lawyer pointed that out." Clara unfolded the page. 2 names. 2 addresses, one in Midland and one near San Angelo. "Have you talked to them?" she said. "No, I don't." He shook his head. "That's not my call to make, but they need to know that there may be a way to speak without violating the NDA." She folded the page and put it with the USB drive. "I'll get this to James today." Preston nodded. He looked like a man who had set something heavy down and was still in the process of registering what it felt like to have empty hands. She called James from the parking lot. He answered immediately, which she'd noticed was his default. James Ritter seemed to operate in a state of perpetual readiness, like someone who had been in the middle of something urgent for so long it had become his resting condition. "Preston is here," she said. "He has documents and contact information for the previous NDA landowners." A beat. "The internal strategy memo?" "He says it's not ambiguous." Another beat, and in it Clara could hear James thinking, the particular silence of a lawyer reorganizing around new information. "Can you both get to Abilene Monday morning?" "I'll ask him." Preston agreed to Abilene on Monday. He drove away in the gray Volvo, back toward the highway, and Clara watched him go and thought about what it cost people to do the right thing late. Not too late, but late. How that had its own particular weight. Different from doing it early, which was its own different thing, and neither one was easy. She drove out to the ranch. Ethan was in the south pasture working on a section of fencing that had come down in a wind 2 days ago. She found him by following the sound of the post driver, a rhythmic, mechanical thudding that carried across the open land. He was working with a ranch hand named Cody, a lean, weathered man in his mid-50s who acknowledged Clara's arrival with a nod and then went back to holding the post. Clara stood at the edge of the pasture and watched for a moment. There was something about watching Ethan work that was different from watching him do almost anything else. He moved without waste. Every motion was purposeful, connected to the next, the way people move when they've done something long enough that the body has memorized it, and the mind can be elsewhere. But his mind wasn't elsewhere. She could see that too. The attention he paid, the way he assessed the angle of the post before driving it. When the section was set, he walked over. Cody went to work on the next post without prompting, which said something about how they operated together. "How'd it go?" Ethan said. She showed him the USB drive, told him about the strategy memo, told him about the NDA landowners. He stood in the pasture with the wind coming at them sideways and listened to all of it. His jacket had mud on the elbow from where he'd knelt to check something, and he didn't seem to notice or care, which was one of many things Clara had cataloged without meaning to over the weeks she'd spent in Red Hollow. The particular indifference he had to how he appeared, the total absence of performance. "James can use this," she said. "Yes." He looked at the drive in her hand. "When does it go to state level?" James said next week. He's been in contact with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the State Attorney General's office. With the strategy memo, she paused. With that, they have documented intent, not just a problematic project structure. Actual intent. Ethan looked at the fence line, at the long flat expanse of his land going out in every direction. "My grandfather fought a different version of this," he said. "Different era, different form. Back in the 70s, there was a company that wanted to run a pipeline through this property, eminent domain arguments, political pressure." He paused. "He fought for 2 years, nearly lost everything twice. But he knew that if you give up the land, you give up everything that comes with it. The water, the history, the ability to hand something to the next generation that's actually worth something." "He won?" "He won." A pause. "He also died 3 years later. Heart attack. My dad always said the fight aged him." He looked at Clara. "But my dad also said he would have done the same thing, that some things are worth fighting for regardless of what the fight costs you." Clara thought about her $412, about the medical bill, about the Meridian job and the regional director path that had been receding for 6 years. "Do you ever regret staying?" she said. "After your wife died. You could have sold, moved somewhere easier." He took a moment before answering, which was his way. "I thought about it. First year, I thought about it seriously. Lily was 4. I was running this ranch alone, and I thought, maybe this is too much. Maybe easier is the right answer." "What changed?" He looked at the land. "I woke up one morning early, maybe 3 months after Sarah died, and it was one of those October mornings where everything is clear and cold and the light is right, and I went out to check the cattle, and I stood in the east pasture, and I thought, she loved this place. She walked this land. Lily was conceived in this house." He stopped. "I couldn't make myself leave something that still had that much of her in it." Clara said nothing. "There are things people tell you that don't require a response, only a witness." "So I stayed," he said. "And then staying became normal, and then normal became this." He gestured vaguely at the land, the house, the distant shape of the barn. "Which is enough. It's more than enough." Cody called something from down the fence line. Ethan raised a hand to indicate he'd heard. "Come to dinner tonight," he said to Clara. "I'll cook. Lily's been asking to show you something." "The spring," Clara said. He looked at her. "She told you." "Weeks ago. She's been building up to it." Clara paused. "She takes it seriously." Something moved in his face the way it did when Lily came up, that involuntary softening that he couldn't quite contain. "She does," he said. "She thinks of it as hers to protect. I don't know where she got that." He paused. "Actually, I do know where she got it." He walked back toward Cody and the fence, and Clara drove back toward town, and the day moved forward the way days did in Red Hollow. Slowly, visibly, with enough space around each hour to actually see it passing. Dinner was chili, which Ethan made from scratch, and which was better than anything Clara had eaten in weeks, and cornbread that was slightly uneven on one side because, Lily explained, the oven ran hot on the left. After dinner, as the sun was going down and the sky was doing the thing it did in West Texas, going through every shade between gold and dark blue in about 40 minutes, Lily put on her coat and her boots and stood at the back door with the patient authority of someone who has been waiting for the right moment for a long time. "Now," she said. "The light's right." The spring was half a mile from the house, down a slope through a stand of cedar and across a section of pasture that was lower and greener than the surrounding land because of the moisture below. Clara followed Ethan and Lily through the cedar trees in the last of the October light, Roy ambling along behind them at a pace that said he'd done this walk many times. She heard it before she saw it, a quiet sound, very low, the sound of water moving through stone. And then they came through the last of the cedars, and it was there. It wasn't dramatic. She thought later that she'd expected something more dramatic. A dramatic thing deserved a dramatic setting. But the spring was just a place where water came up through the limestone and collected in a shallow pool before running off into a channel that disappeared into the grass. The pool was maybe 12 feet across. The water was clear and very cold and moved with a barely perceptible current even at the surface. Around it, the grass was different. Greener, softer. The kind of growth that happens when water is reliable. Lily stood at the edge of it with her hands in her coat pockets. "My mom used to sit here," she said, to the water more than to anyone. "My dad told me." "I know," Clara said. "I come here sometimes when I need to think." She looked at Clara seriously. "Not very often. You shouldn't use special places too much or they stop being special." "That's good thinking." "I know." Lily crouched and put 2 fingers in the water, then pulled them back. "It's cold," she announced, as if this might be news. Then she looked up at Clara. "Is the company really going to try to dry it up?" Clara looked at Ethan. He was standing back slightly, giving Lily the space to ask the question herself, which Clara understood was a deliberate thing. He did that, gave people the dignity of asking directly. "They were trying to," Clara said, "but we're working to stop them." "And it's working? The stopping?" "Yes," Clara said. "I think so." Lily stood up and wiped her wet fingers on her coat. "Good." Then, with the ability children have to treat enormous things as settled once they're settled, "Can we go back? It's getting cold." They walked back through the cedar trees in the near dark, Lily between the 2 adults, Roy behind. She slipped her hand into Ethan's naturally, without announcement, the way children do with parents, automatic, unthinking, a habit of safety. After a few steps, she reached her other hand toward Clara. Clara took it. She felt Ethan notice it. She didn't look at him. They walked back to the house with Lily's hands in both of theirs, and the stars coming out above the cedar tops and the sound of the spring fading behind them, and none of them said anything about it, which was the right thing, which was the only thing. The following Monday, Clara and Preston sat in James Ritter's office in Abilene for 4 hours. Preston's lawyer, a careful, precise woman named Dana Cho, who had no relation to Richard Cho, and who looked like she'd heard everything twice already and was unimpressed by all of it, sat beside him. James had 2 associates with him. On the table between them was the USB drive and the printed contact page and a physical copy of the strategy memo, which James had printed and placed in a folder and which he now opened. He read one specific passage aloud. 14 months ago, in a communication from Victor Hale's office to the senior acquisition team, primary asset value resides in groundwater access, not surface development. Surface project serves as structural justification for water rights establishment and long-term pumping infrastructure. Acquisition priority is Eastern Corridor parcels with documented connection to Edwards Trinity system. Development timeline should be calibrated to ensure water infrastructure precedes any conservation challenges. The room was very quiet when he finished reading. Preston's lawyer made a note. "That's the one," Preston said. He said it flatly. No drama. "That's the document that I read 14 months ago and told myself was standard aggressive strategy language." "It's not," James said. "I know that now." He looked at the table. "I think I knew it then." Dana made another note. The meeting ran long. By the time it finished, James had a formal cooperation agreement with Preston and a clear framework for what the State Attorney General's office would receive by end of week. He also had, through an intermediate contact, a preliminary agreement from one of the two NDA landowners, the one in Midland, to speak to state investigators. The one near San Angelo was still deciding. Clara drove back to Red Hollow in the late afternoon, the highway straight and flat, and the sky enormous above it, the way it only is in places where there's nothing to interrupt the view. She was tired in a way that was clean, the tiredness of something that's been worked through, not the tiredness of something unfinished. Her phone rang at 5:15, a number she recognized now. Victor Hale's private line, the one he'd called from before. She answered. "Miss Dawson." The voice was the same. Smooth, authoritative, the voice of a man who expected the room to arrange itself around him. But there was something underneath it that hadn't been there before. A slight hardness, like something that's been smooth on the surface for a long time and is starting to show what's beneath. "I understand you had a meeting in Abilene today?" She kept her voice neutral. "I meet with a lot of people. I'm going to be direct." The smoothness dropped a fraction. "What you're doing, what you and Ritter are doing, it's going to accomplish exactly nothing except harm to people who don't deserve it. Preston Wyatt had a good career and now he has exposure. The Callaway Ranch is going to face legal challenges that will cost more than they have, and you—" He paused. "You're going to find that there are very few firms in Texas development that will hire someone known for torpedoing a $200 million project." Clara drove on the straight highway with her phone against her ear. "Is that what I've done?" she said. "That's what you're doing," he said. "There's still time to stop." "Mr. Hale," she said, and kept her voice completely even. "I want you to think about something. You've been assembling parcels across this corridor for 9 years. You've structured deals carefully, used multiple company names, settled problems with NDAs. You've been very patient and very thorough." She paused. "But somewhere in that 9 years, you created a document that uses the word aquifer 17 times and the word development 3 times. And that document is now in the hands of the Texas Attorney General's office." Silence. "You should talk to your lawyers," she said. "Not the Meridian ones. Your personal ones." She hung up. She drove the rest of the way to Red Hollow with the window down and the cold air coming in and her hand steady on the wheel. She wasn't triumphant. She didn't feel that. She felt the strange calm of someone who has done what could be done and is now waiting for the world to process it. The news broke on a Thursday. Not local news, state news, picked up from a Texas Tribune report on a state attorney general investigation into water rights fraud across a West Texas development corridor. Meridian Land Development was named. Victor Hale was named. The story cited public records and regulatory filings, and in careful legal language, the cooperation of a former company insider. Clara read it in the Lone Star Inn parking lot on her phone. Then she drove to the ranch. Ethan was on the porch when she got there, which meant he'd already seen it. He had his coffee and Roy was at his feet, and the morning was cold and clear, and the news was out in the world, doing whatever news does once you let it go. "James called," he said when she got out of the car. "What did he say?" He said, Ethan looked at the pasture. "He said the injunction is now essentially permanent. The Phase 1 survey access is blocked indefinitely. The Attorney General's office has opened a formal investigation." He paused. He said Victor Hale's primary investors are already requesting emergency meetings. She sat down on the porch step. Roy got up and came to lean against her knee, which was very much what she needed. "It's not over," she said. "The investigation will take time. Hale's lawyers will fight." "I know." Ethan sat in the porch chair. But it's different now. Fighting is different from what he was doing before, which was just moving forward because nobody knew to stop him. He looked at her. Somebody knew. She looked at her hands. They were cold. She hadn't worn enough jacket for this morning, which was something she kept doing, misjudging Texas October, thinking it would be warmer than it was. Ethan went inside, came back with a blanket from somewhere, just brought it out and set it on the step beside her without saying anything. She pulled it around her shoulders. "What happens to you now?" he said. It was the same question he'd asked her on the very first morning she'd come to his kitchen, except it meant something different now. "Professionally?" She thought about it. "I don't know yet. James mentioned there might be consulting work. Other landowners in the corridor who'll need someone who understands the documentation. Environmental law firms sometimes hire from outside." She paused. "I talked to someone at a nonprofit land preservation group in Austin. They work on exactly this kind of thing, protecting rural land from bad faith acquisition." She paused again. "They asked if I'd be interested in talking. Are you?" "I think so." She looked out at the land. "It pays less than Meridian, considerably less." She said it plainly, not sadly. "But I keep thinking about something my mother said, that I couldn't afford to do the wrong thing, and I think she's right, and I think the inverse is also true. I can't afford not to do the right one, even if the math is harder." Ethan was quiet for a while. The morning was bright and cold, and somewhere in the south pasture she could hear cattle, that particular low sound they made when they were settled and unhurried. "There's a guest house," he said, "at the back of the property. My grandmother lived in it for the last years of her life. It's small and the heater works, but the windows need replacing." He said it all at once, without preamble, which she was learning was how he said things he'd been thinking about for a while. "If you needed somewhere to stay while you figure out the next thing, you're welcome to use it." Clara looked at him. He looked back, steady, his face doing the thing it did where it was hard to tell what he was feeling except that whatever it was real. "That's not a complicated offer," he said. "It's just a house." "I know," she said. "And Lily would—" He stopped. "She'd like it, having you close." "Just Lily," Clara said. He looked at the pasture. The ghost of something moved across his face. "No," he said. "Not just Lily." They sat on the porch in the October cold with the blanket around her shoulders and the news out in the world and the land all around them, and neither of them said anything more about it, which was how they both seemed to prefer the important things. Said once, clearly, and then left to stand on their own. Inside the house, Lily was making breakfast and burning the toast and announcing that it was fine because she'd meant to do it that way. Roy thumped his tail once against the porch boards and went back to sleep. And the spring, down the slope through the cedar trees, moved cold and clear and certain through the limestone the way it had been moving for longer than any of them had been alive. The guest house smelled like cedar and old wool, and the particular kind of dust that accumulates in places that have been loved and then left empty. The windows were single pane, as advertised, and in the mornings Clara could feel the cold coming through them before she even got out of bed. The heater made a sound like someone clearing their throat every time it kicked on. The kitchen was barely a kitchen. A 2-burner stove, a refrigerator that hummed at a slightly different pitch than the heater, a single window above the sink that looked out toward the cedar trees and beyond them. If you knew where to look, the low place in the land where the spring ran. She moved in on a Wednesday in early November with 2 bags and her laptop and the 5-year-old personal computer that had been through more in the past month than it had in the previous 4 years combined. Lily supervised the move from the porch of the main house with the seriousness of a foreman, offering opinions on where things should go despite not having access to the guest house itself, and at one point presented Clara with a drawing she'd made, a house with a tree beside it, and 2 figures outside and a dog that was recognizably Roy, drawn in brown crayon with impressive accuracy. "That's you," Lily said, pointing to the shorter figure. "I'm shorter than the tree," Clara said. "Trees are tall," Lily said, with the air of someone explaining basic physics. "That's not a criticism." Clara put the drawing on the guest house windowsill, where it stayed. The investigation moved the way institutional processes move, with a combination of sudden lurches and extended silences that were hard to read from the outside. James called with updates when there were updates. When there weren't, Clara learned to sit with the uncertainty, which was harder than it sounded for someone who had spent her professional life in the controlled urgency of deal cycles and quarterly deadlines. Here, time moved differently. The land didn't care about deadlines. The cattle didn't care. The spring certainly didn't. She started working for the nonprofit in Austin, the land preservation group Cornerstone Rural Trust, remotely, which was possible because most of what they needed from her initially was document analysis and landowner communication, two things she could do from a single-pane window in a cedar-scented guest house in Red Hollow. Her salary was 60% of what Meridian had paid her. She built a spreadsheet on the first day and looked at her debt and her expenses and determined that 60% was survivable if she was careful, and that careful was something she knew how to be. She'd been practicing it her whole life. The work was different from acquisition. Almost opposite, in a way she hadn't fully anticipated. Acquisition was about pressure, identifying leverage, finding the angle, moving people toward a predetermined outcome. What she did for Cornerstone was the reverse of that. She was learning to listen to what land meant to people before anyone told them what it was worth. It turned out that those were very different things, and the gap between them was where most of the damage got done. In the evenings, she ate dinner at the main house more often than not. Not every night. She had enough self-awareness to understand that need and proximity were a complicated combination, and she was careful not to become something Ethan and Lily organized their evenings around out of habit rather than want. But 3 or 4 times a week, she'd walk across the property in the dark with a flashlight, and Roy would meet her at the gate, and Lily would already be telling her something before she got through the door, something about school or about Pepper the horse or about whatever book she was currently in the middle of. Ethan cooked, mostly. He was a decent cook in the way of someone who'd had to learn out of necessity and had developed a functional repertoire: chili, brisket, a pasta dish that Lily called the orange one, which Clara suspected was just canned tomatoes and sausage, but which was genuinely good. Sometimes Clara brought things. She'd started going to the Abilene Farmers Market on Saturdays, partly because James's office was in Abilene and she occasionally had meetings there, and partly because there was something grounding about the market, the ordinary human transactions of food and season. She'd bring back vegetables and cheese and sometimes a pie from a stand run by a woman named Dot, who had opinions about everything and shared them freely, which Clara found refreshing. The 3 of them ate dinner and Lily talked and Roy positioned himself under the table in hope. And the evenings passed in the particular way that ordinary life passes, when it's also, quietly, something more than ordinary. She and Ethan didn't talk directly about what was between them for a long time. They talked around it, through it, beside it, in the way of 2 people who have both been hurt enough by the unexpected that they developed a certain respect for things that couldn't be taken back. He'd lost his wife. She'd lost, well, not a person, but a version of herself she'd been building for years. The practical professional who kept her head down and closed deals and told herself the math would eventually work. Losing that version had been painful in ways she was still sorting out. Neither of them was in a hurry. But things have a way of arriving whether you're ready or not. It was a Saturday in late November, cold enough now that frost came at night and stayed on the grass until 10 in the morning. Lily was at a sleepover at a school friend's house. Her first sleepover, which she'd approached with an air of great adventure and mild terror. And Clara had come over to help Ethan repair the guest house windows, which had finally gotten cold enough that she'd mentioned them, and he'd said he'd been meaning to do that, and she'd said she'd help, which was how they ended up on ladders on a Saturday afternoon doing something practical that required proximity and occasional hands passing things between them, and conversation that kept starting and stopping the way conversations do when people are doing something physical. They'd gotten 2 of the 3 windows done when it started getting dark. They packed up the tools and went inside, and Ethan made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table. His kitchen, not hers, the familiar table with the coffee ring and the crayon drawings on the corner and Roy under the chair, and the quiet that settled between them was a different kind of quiet than usual. "You've been here 6 weeks," he said. "Almost 7. You still talk like you might leave." She looked at her coffee. "I talk like I'm aware that leaving is a possibility. That's different." "Is it?" She thought about it honestly. "I don't know, maybe not." He turned his mug on the table, a rotation without purpose. "When Sarah died, I told myself I'd never, that it was a one-time thing, that what we had, that you don't find that twice, and it would be a kind of dishonesty to pretend otherwise." He looked at the mug. "I still think that's true, actually. I don't think you find the same thing twice. No, Clara said. But I've been thinking... He stopped. Tried again. I've been thinking that maybe that's the wrong way to frame it. Like you only get one kind of thing and everything else is lesser. He looked up. I don't think that's right either. Clara sat with that for a moment. She thought about her own history, the relationships she'd had that had been functional and ultimately empty, or the ones that had been meaningful and then ended because she'd been too focused on the version of her life she was trying to build to give the actual life in front of her enough attention. She'd made her choices. They'd been her choices. She owned them. I'm not Sarah, she said. I know that. He said it immediately, firmly, without any ambiguity. That's not... He shook his head. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I've been using her as a reason to stay closed, and I think she would have found that... He almost smiled. She would have had opinions about that. What kind of opinions? Pointed ones. He looked at Clara. She wasn't a patient person. She had about zero tolerance for people not saying what they meant. A pause. Lily gets that from her. Lily is extremely direct, Clara agreed. She told me, by the way, Ethan said. About 2 weeks ago, she said, Dad, do you like Clara the way you liked Mom? And I said that was a complicated question, and she said, that means yes. Clara felt something happen in her chest that she couldn't quite classify. What did you say? I said she was probably right. The kitchen was very still. Roy was asleep under the table. Outside the window, the November dark had come all the way in, and the stars were doing what they did in Red Hollow without competition. I'm still figuring out who I am after this, Clara said. She said it because it was true, and because she thought he deserved the true version. Meridian wasn't just a job, it was how I understood myself. The practical one, the one who closed deals, the one who was going to pay off the debt and get the promotion and finally be stable. She paused. I'm not that person anymore, or not only that person, and I'm still working out what's left. I know, he said. I'm not easy, she said. I have a lot of debt and a job that pays significantly less than my previous one, and I spent the better part of 6 years being someone I'm not particularly proud of. You spent the better part of 6 weeks being someone I think is worth a lot, he said. Not warmly, not with any of the performance that statement might have come with from a different kind of man. Just factually, like something he'd observed and determined to be accurate. She looked at him across the kitchen table. This man who made his daughter breakfast and fixed his own fences and carried grief quietly and said true things without dressing them up. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Which was not, by any conventional measure, a declaration. But it was theirs and it was real, and sometimes that's the better version. The investigation resolution came in stages, which was unsatisfying but accurate to how the world operates. The first stage arrived in December. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality issued a formal cease and desist on all Meridian-affiliated survey and acquisition activity in the corridor. This was the injunction made permanent, essentially, backed now by state regulatory authority rather than just the county judge's order. Meridian's lawyers filed a response. The response was, according to James, technically competent and strategically pointless. The second stage came in January. Preston Wyatt's formal cooperation with the Attorney General's investigation was made public, not dramatically, not in a press conference, just as a line in a regulatory filing. His lawyer had negotiated an immunity agreement that covered his cooperation period. He resigned from Meridian the same day the filing appeared. Clara heard from him once after that, a brief text that said only, "Thank you for calling me back that day." She texted back, "Thank you for answering." She didn't hear from him again, which was fine. Some connections are important without being permanent. That's allowed. The third and most consequential stage arrived in February. The Attorney General's office, working with federal investigators who had been brought in because several of the corporate structures crossed state lines, filed formal charges against Victor Hale personally. 14 counts. They covered fraud, conspiracy to commit water rights violations, and the charge that James said was the one that would stick hardest. A Texas statute specifically protecting landowners from deceptive acquisition practices involving environmental misrepresentation. The strategy memo, with its 17 uses of the word aquifer, was listed in the charging document as Exhibit A. Clara read the charging document at the kitchen table in the guest house on a cold February morning, with the heater clearing its throat and the drawing of the house and the tree and Roy on the windowsill. She read it carefully, the way she'd read every Meridian document, methodically, looking for gaps, looking for what was said and what wasn't. There were no gaps. James had done his job thoroughly. She called him. "Is it enough?" she said. "For conviction?" He sounded more awake than any person had a right to be at 7:30 in the morning. "Honestly, I think Hale takes a deal before trial. His lawyers know the exhibit list. They've seen the strategy memo. They know Preston is cooperating. A deal gets him less time, more control over the outcome." A pause. "But the charges stand either way. The regulatory findings stand. The land protection stand. Those aren't conditional on a conviction. And the corridor, the other parcels? The cease and desist covers all affiliated activity. His investors have already walked, publicly, with statements about being unaware of the water rights strategy, which I don't fully believe, but it doesn't matter what I believe. The financing is gone. The project is structurally dead even without the legal process." He paused. "Red Hollow is protected. The other parcels in the corridor are protected. That's what we set out to do." Clara sat at the table for a moment after hanging up. She thought about October. The silver Tahoe and the company laptop and the travel mug of cold gas station coffee and the pasture fence and the man she'd told to move his tractor. 4 months. It felt longer and shorter simultaneously, the way significant time tends to. She put on her jacket and walked across the property to the main house. The February morning was cold and gray, and the grass was frost-silvered, and she could see her breath. Roy met her at the gate. Ethan was in the kitchen. Lily had already left for school. She was old enough now to ride the bus, which she did with the pride of someone exercising a new freedom, standing at the end of the ranch road every morning with her backpack and her book. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the particular morning smell of a house where people live and work. Not a showpiece, just a place. She told him about the charges. He listened the way he always listened, just fully, without interrupting, his coffee in his hand. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 14 counts. 14. He nodded once, set his coffee down, looked at the window. She'd seen him receive many things in this kitchen over the past months. Legal updates, logistical problems, a calf that had been sick for a week and hadn't pulled through, all the small and large griefs of running a ranch and raising a child alone. He received things in a particular way, with a stillness that wasn't numbness, more like the way a strong structure absorbs force. It moves slightly, registers it, holds. "He's not going to walk away from it," she said, "even with a deal. This doesn't just go away for him." "No." He looked at her. "Does it feel like enough?" She thought about the 17 families. She thought about Preston's face in Patsy's diner. She thought about Lily at the spring saying, "I come here sometimes when I need to think." She thought about Sarah, who she had never met and would never meet, who had loved this place enough that leaving it felt like losing her twice. "It feels like what's possible," she said, "which is not the same as enough, but it's what there is." He thought about that. "That's honest." "I've been trying to be." They stood in the kitchen in the February cold with their coffees and the heater going and the ordinary morning sounds of a working ranch coming through the walls. And she thought about the question she'd asked herself in the Lone Star Inn parking lot all those months ago. What happens to you now? And how different the answer was from anything she could have anticipated. The land preservation work with Cornerstone expanded in the spring. As word moved through the corridor about what had happened in Red Hollow, through county networks and ranching communities and the particular way news travels in rural Texas, which is slower than the internet but considerably more thorough, other families started reaching out. Families who had received letters. Families who had been approached by companies they couldn't quite place. Families who had felt the pressure of a thing they couldn't name but recognized as wrong. Clara drove to them. She sat in their kitchens and on their porches and in their feed stores, and she listened before she spoke, which was a discipline she'd had to learn deliberately and was still learning. She explained documents. She helped people understand what they owned and what they were being asked to give up, and what the difference between those two things was worth. She was not always successful. Some people were too far into negotiation to pull back. Some deals were simply done. She learned to live with that too. The cases that went the wrong way, the land that changed hands, the families that had to find a different life. You couldn't win all of them. Pretending otherwise would have been a different kind of dishonesty. But some she could help, more than she'd expected. And that was the math she was doing now. Not the debt spreadsheet, though that existed and she was working it down slowly with the discipline she'd always had, but the other accounting. The one that didn't have a clean column for assets but had something that functioned like it anyway. Her mother came to visit in April. She drove up from Corpus Christi in her own car, which she'd had for 12 years and which ran on will and maintenance, and arrived at the Callaway Ranch on a Saturday afternoon. Clara had described the place to her on the phone, but descriptions of land rarely land right until you're standing on it. Her mother stood at the front gate and looked at the pasture and the house and the cedar trees and the long flat sky and said quietly, "Oh, baby." "I know," Clara said. "You live in that little house?" "The guest house, yes." Her mother looked at it, looked at the main house, looked at Clara with the particular expression of a woman who had been watching her daughter circle something for 30 years and had been patient about it. "And the man," her mother said. "His name is Ethan. And his daughter, Lily. She's going to talk to you about books." "I like books." Her mother put her arm around Clara's shoulders. "You look different." "Different how?" Her mother thought about it. "Like yourself," she said finally. "Like the version of you that was always in there behind the other version." Clara didn't say anything to that. She let it stand the way true things sometimes need to stand without response. Not because there's nothing to say, but because saying something would make it smaller. Lily came out onto the porch and looked at Clara's mother with assessment that was instantly, specifically, Lily. "Are you Clara's mom?" "I am." "You have the same nose," Lily said with the factual satisfaction of someone who has confirmed a hypothesis. "Do you want to see my horse? Her leg is better. She was limping, but now she's not." Clara's mother looked at Clara. "I want to see her horse," she said. "I know," Clara said. Ethan came out onto the porch and shook Clara's mother's hand with the quiet, unperforming courtesy that was simply how he was. And her mother looked at him for exactly the length of time she needed to, and then said she was very glad to meet him, and meant it in the way she meant things, which was completely. They ate dinner on the porch that evening, despite the April cold, because Lily had decided the porch was the right place, and Lily's hospitality decisions were, by this point, essentially policy. There was brisket and cornbread and something her mother had brought from Corpus Christi that was her grandmother's recipe, sweet potato something, which Lily ate 2 servings of and then required the recipe, which Clara's mother gave her with full seriousness. After dinner, when Lily had gone inside to read and Ethan had gone to check the cattle and Clara's mother had her coffee and the stars were coming out in the big Texas sky, her mother said, "Are you happy?" Clara thought about it, really thought, because her mother deserved that. "Not the way I thought happiness was supposed to feel," she said. "It's not. I thought it would feel like relief, like you'd been uncomfortable for a long time and suddenly you weren't." She looked at the stars. "It's more like I feel like I'm in the right place doing the right things with the right people, and that's not comfortable exactly. The work is hard, the money is tight. There are still problems every day." She paused. "But I feel like I'm actually here, not somewhere else trying to get somewhere." Her mother drank her coffee, looked at the stars, said, "That's better than happy." They sat on the porch until it got too cold, and then went inside, and that was the visit, and it was enough. Victor Hale accepted a plea agreement in May. 11 of the 14 counts, reduced sentencing in exchange for cooperation with the federal component of the investigation. The plea was reported in the Texas Tribune and briefly in national business media, and then the news cycle moved on the way news cycles do, because the world contained many things, and not all of them got to stay in the foreground. What stayed in the foreground for the people it mattered to was the result. Meridian Land Development's Red Hollow project was formally terminated. The parent company restructured under bankruptcy protection. The corridor parcels, the ones Hale had been assembling for 9 years, were now encumbered by regulatory findings that made their value for water rights exploitation essentially zero. The families who had been approached, the ones who hadn't yet signed, were, in the language of the Attorney General's office, protected from the deceptive acquisition practices documented in the case. James Ritter sent Clara a bottle of wine and a card that said, in his characteristically efficient handwriting, "We did what we set out to do. Good work." She put the card on the refrigerator in the guest house beside Lily's drawing of the house and the tree and Roy. On the evening the plea agreement was announced, Clara walked down to the spring alone. It was May, and the cedar trees were green now, and the grass around the spring pool was thick and bright, the kind of growth that comes from reliable water. She sat on the limestone edge the way Lily had described sitting, close enough to put her fingers in if she wanted, though she didn't right away. She just sat. She thought about the first time she'd stood on this land, in her wrong boots with her clipboard, telling a man to move his tractor. The arrogance of that morning, which hadn't been cruelty but had been something almost worse, indifference. She'd been so focused on the thing she was trying to build, the professional version of herself, the stable version, the version that had escaped poverty and paid off the debt and earned the title, that she'd stopped being able to see what other people were trying to protect. That was the thing about survival mode. It was necessary. She understood that about herself now without the judgment she used to carry. Survival mode had gotten her through a lot. It had also, for a long time, prevented her from seeing that surviving wasn't the same as living, and that the difference mattered. She put her fingers in the water. Cold, as Lily had reported, clear down to the pale limestone bottom. She heard footsteps on the path and didn't turn around, because she knew the sound of them. Ethan sat down beside her on the limestone, not close enough to be crowding, just close enough to be there. He looked at the water the way he looked at most things, with full attention that didn't announce itself. "Lily wanted to come," he said. "I told her you might need a minute." "That was perceptive of you." She argued, "I had to deploy the bedtime is non-negotiable line." "How'd that go?" "She went to bed under protest and is definitely reading under her covers with a flashlight right now." Clara smiled. "She gets that from somewhere." "Probably." He picked up a small piece of limestone and turned it over in his hand. "It's done then. The legal part." "The legal part," she said. "The other parts take longer." "Most things do." They sat by the water in the May dark with the cedar trees around them and the stars above doing their reliable work. Somewhere back at the house, a light was on in Lily's window, which confirmed the flashlight hypothesis. "I was thinking," Ethan said after a while. "About what?" He turned the limestone piece in his hands, set it down on the edge of the pool. "About a foundation, land preservation. James has been talking about structuring something, a formal organization that could hold conservation easements for ranching families in the corridor. Use the legal precedent from this case to create something more durable." He looked at the water. "He thinks there's grant funding available, environmental law organizations that would support it." A pause. "He thinks whoever runs the landowner communication and documentation side of it would need to know acquisition law and be good with people and understand what the families are actually trying to protect." Clara looked at him. "I'm not trying to make your professional decisions for you," he said. But Cornerstone is in Austin, and Austin is 3 hours away, and..." He stopped. Tried again. "I'm better at fixing fences than I am at this kind of thing, saying things." He looked at the spring. "The foundation would be based here, in Red Hollow, because the case is here and the relationships are here, and..." He set the limestone piece back down. "Because I'd like you to stay. Not in the guest house. Not as a..." He stopped again. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. I know what you're saying." He looked at her. "Do you?" "You're not good at saying things," she said. "You're actually fine at saying things. You just take a while." Something moved across his face. "The foundation is a real idea. James can walk you through the structure." "I know it's a real idea." She looked at the water. "I'm going to say yes. To the foundation. To all of it." She looked at him. "To all of it, Ethan." He was quiet for a moment. The spring moved cold and certain through the limestone. Above the cedar tops, the stars were doing what they'd been doing for longer than any of this, longer than the ranch or the road or the town or any of the decisions that had brought two people from very different lives to this particular piece of ground on this particular evening. "Okay," he said. It was the same word she'd used in his kitchen in November. They had a small vocabulary of important words, the two of them. Short, plain, load-bearing. That was fine. Those were often the best kind. He reached over and put his hand over hers on the limestone edge, and she turned her hand over and they held on, which was not a small thing and not a complicated thing, just a human thing, the oldest and most necessary of them. They stayed by the spring until the cold came in properly, and then walked back up through the cedar trees to the house where a light was on in Lily's window. Ethan went in first and went down the hall, and there was a brief negotiation, quiet enough that Clara couldn't hear the words, and then the light in the window went out. She stood in the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea, because she knew where it was now, knew this kitchen the way she knew the guest house and the ranch road and the path to the spring, the way you know places when you've been in them enough times that your body learns them without asking your mind. Ethan came back and sat at the table. Roy arranged himself under the chair. She was on chapter 8, he said. Of what? The Secret Garden. Again. Does she cry at that one? At the part where... He thought about it. There's a part near the end. She cries at that part every time, but she keeps reading it. That sounds about right, Clara said. The good ones are like that. She brought 2 mugs of tea to the table and sat down across from him. And outside the window, Red Hollow was dark and quiet, and the land was all around them in every direction, solid and certain the way land is when it's been held by the same family long enough to remember who it belongs to. She thought about something Lily had said months ago, sitting on that fence rail with her book on her lap. The land's got our family in it, like how a book's got words. You can't take the words out and still have the same book. She'd been 7 years old and she'd said the truest thing about this place that anyone had said to her since she arrived. Which was not surprising, Claire had come to understand, because Lily was exactly who she appeared to be. Unfiltered, attentive, entirely herself in the way that children are before the world teaches them to be something else instead. She thought about what it would mean to be around that every day, to let some of it, the unfiltered, the attentive, the entirely yourself, teach her back. She thought about her mother's words on the porch. Like yourself. Like the version of you that was always in there behind the other version. She thought about the woman who had arrived in Red Hollow in October with a travel mug and a clipboard and a professional armor that she'd spent years constructing and believed was the same thing as strength. It wasn't the same thing. She knew that now. Strength was what Ethan did, carrying what needed to be carried and setting down what didn't, and knowing which was which. Strength was what her mother had done, double shifts and a leaking roof, never once letting fear become cruelty. Strength was what Lily did every time she read the same book to the crying part and kept going. She was learning it. She was still learning. Outside the kitchen window, the Texas night was full of the sounds that come when everything quiets down enough to hear what's always been there. The wind in the dry grass, the cattle shifting in the south pasture, the low creak of the porch boards cooling in the night air. And beneath all of it, if you knew to listen, the presence of water moving quietly through the limestone in the dark, doing what it had always done, indifferent to the people above it who had fought over it and for it and because of it, running cold and clean and certain through the ancient stone. It had been there longer than the ranch and longer than the town and longer than any of them. It would be there after. That was the thing about water and land and the things worth protecting. They didn't need you to save them because they mattered to you. They needed you to save them because they were real, and real things mattered, and you were there, and sometimes that was enough of a reason. Clara drank her tea. Ethan drank his. Roy slept. The stars outside the window did their patient, indifferent work. The story doesn't end with everything fixed. That would be a different kind of story. A tidier one. A more comfortable one. The kind that resolves like a piece of music finding its final chord. Real things don't end that way. Clara still had debt. Ethan still had grief he carried in the lower back quiet way of someone who had learned to live with weight rather than be rid of it. The corridor still had families who had been pressured and scared. The land still needed protecting, would keep needing it, because that was the nature of land and the nature of people who want to take things that belong to someone else. But some things had been saved that needed saving. Some truth had been brought out of the dark of legal annexures and corporate structures and the particular cowardice of looking away from what you know is wrong. Some water was still running that might not have been. Some people were still on their land who might not have been. And 2 people who had come to the same place from very different directions had found that the place itself had something to say about where they ought to be. That's not a small thing. In a world that produces plenty of the other kind, it is, in fact, very far from small.